think he doesn't like it. He didn't want to sit next to me in the closed session. The love.
Could I have the call the meeting? Good, please, everyone. I have the pleasure for you, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We already were in a closed session, so we don't need a roll call vote. Everybody is present. Anybody from the public wishes to comment? Could you please state your name for the record? Thank you.
Push the button first. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Good evening, board. My name is Mark Masterocco, and I'm with Pulte Homes. We're the developer of the residences at the Cuneo Mansion and Gardens development. I spoke to President Patel earlier today and left a voicemail with your superintendent regarding the fact that we just learned today for the very first time, or actually I think it was yesterday, that I should say we learned today that the board had taken action regarding changing the elementary school boundary for our new development. As many of you know, we've been working on this project for over 4 years with all the stakeholders in the community and have had a lot of conversation with all the stakeholders, including the school district. But it wasn't until yesterday that we learned that, number one, there was even discussion about the elementary school being changed. And two, today we learned for the very first time, I guess, that the board had taken action at the November 13th meeting. And certainly we appreciate the importance of the process, but we think it's critical as a stakeholder in your community that there should have been communication to us to let us know, number one, that there was even a consideration of the elementary school being changed for Cuneo, and secondly, the fact that action is already taken. So we are requesting that the board reconsider its action as it relates to Cuneo so that there can be a more participatory component to that process as the owner developer of the project.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishes to comment? Thank you. The next is presentation by Ms. Hennessy from Raymond James.
Like answer in the board meeting.
Just so folks know, when there's public comment, the board doesn't respond back or make sit during that board meeting.
Okay, thanks for having me tonight. I'm Elizabeth Hennessy with Raymond James, and I'm here to present an update on outstanding debt and potential refinancing options for savings, as well as possible new money options. So the first section is our market update. So interest rates have remained pretty low this year. What you see is the yield curve, and the interest rate is on the y-axis, and the years are on the bottom on the x-axis. The blue bars represent the highest interest rates have been since 1993, and the blue line is the average, and the red line is where we are now. So you can see, compared to history, going back to 93, we are in a relatively very low interest rate environment. And here's another picture that goes from 2008 through 2017. The low line is lowest line, the dark blue is the 10-year AAA Municipal Market Data Index, which is made up of the largest AAA rated states, the highest credit quality, and has been tracked. So we've got the 10-year, the 20-year, and the 30-year. And you can see we've had ups and downs. The lowest point in recent history was July 2016, when Great Britain decided to exit the European Union, known as the Brexit. Then the high point after that is the election of President Trump last November. And now we're pretty much down to pre-election interest rates. However, we do have a little tenuousness going on in the market right now, driven by supply. As you're very aware, the House and the Senate have proposed tax reform bills, and key portions of those bills are harmful to the municipal market in that they're trying to find ways to raise revenue to offset the tax cuts for corporations. And one of those ways is to eliminate private activity bonds, which are bonds for things like hospitals and universities, 501c3s, cultural institutions. The other thing is to eliminate advance refundings, where you're refunding bonds in advance of the call date. So those two things have driven a very large amount of supply. So we expect from now through the end of the year to see a lot of supply of municipal bonds in the market, which will already has driven interest rates up about 15 basis points. Okay, so I know this is small on the screen, but you have books. Just to review the district's outstanding debt, you've got the 2002 bonds, starting on the left-hand side and going across. Those are new money bonds for the prior building referendum. The 2004 capital appreciation bonds, those are also new money pursuant to referendum. The blue portions of that are bonds that have been refunded in the past. The Series 2009A did refund portions of the 2002 and 2004 referendum bonds, and then the 2009B bonds, those were new money for working cash, not subject to referendum. So those two bonds are going to be callable here January 1 of 2019. So
I'm sorry, can you speak up just a little
bit?
bit?
Sure. Sorry. Is this thing on? Maybe it's not on.
I think it is.
Now it's on.
There we go.
Sorry.
Oh, good. I was thinking I was going deaf there for a minute. Thank you.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about those opportunities and what savings you may get from refunding bonds. But again, the call date is out January 1 of 2019. We can refund those bonds within 90 days of that call date. So we're really looking at next fall to get a plan for refunding those bonds together. Okay, the next slide just looks at your statutory debt limit. And net debt limit is $55.4 million. Based on the 2016 equalized assessed value. In terms of non-referendum bonds, there are three types that can be paid from what's known as the debt service extension base. The debt service extension base is part of the tax cap, and it refers to the amount of principal and interest the district paid in the 1994 levy year or non-referendum bonds, such as working cash, life safety, or funding bonds. So the district can go ahead and issue bonds as long as the payments for those bonds don't exceed that amount. That's why it's under the property tax limitation law, because it's a no tax increase except for CPI, because in 2009 they did add CPI to that formula. And the district has one bond issue outstanding against this debt service extension base, and that's at 2009B bond. So here's let's go from the left side. We've got your equalized assessed value. In 2016, you had a 6.21% increase. The next column is that debt service extension base. So that's that principal and interest that was paid in 1994 plus a CPI factor. And going forward, 2018 and forward, we're assuming 1.5% CPI. CPI is running closer to 2, and of course for 2017 was 2.1%. Then in the middle of the page, you have the current non-referendum debt service. That's the principal and interest on the 2009B bonds, and then remaining capacity in the green box. So you can see there's about 89,000 here in 2017. And then about 100,000, and the majority of it comes back on when those bonds are paid off in 2029. So that's the non-referendum side of the page. And then we go to the referendum bonds, and those again are the 04, 02, and the 2009 A bonds. And those get paid off in 2024, in 7 years. And those are the payments. So together, those make up your total debt service portion of your levy. And then the tax rate for those is on the far right. And you can see it's around 60 cents and goes up to about 82 cents and then comes down just to the D-sub bonds at the end. And this graph shows the non-referendum portion of the debt service because I wanted to show you this in a little bigger form. So you can see the green line is your debt service extension base, and you do have some room under that debt base to issue new bonds if you wanted to. So that's, again, the non-referendum D-sub side of the picture. We go to the next page, we're looking at the referendum portion of the bonds, and those are the bars related to that, ranging from 6.2 up to just under 10 million, and then getting paid off completely in 2024. Okay, so refunding opportunity on these 2009 bonds, call date January 1, 2019. The 2009 A bonds, we must wait for the call date or within 90 days of it to refund those bonds according to IRS law. The 2009 B bonds are new money, and those could be refunded in advance of the call date, but it makes much more sense financially to wait till the call date, and then our Tax Reform Act is going to disallow advance refunding of tax-exempt bonds or on a tax-exempt basis until the call date anyway. So the other reason that it will probably be impossible to do after December 31st if one of these tax reform laws goes through. But that doesn't mean there's not opportunity. Waiting to that call date, let's look firstly at the refunding on the 2009 bonds, 9A bonds. So these are the referendum portion of the bonds. We're showing that refunding occurring in October of 2018, and we're not stretching those bonds out, we're not shortening them up, we're refunding them for the exact same period of time that they are currently outstanding. So there's some substantial savings with this, total savings of over $1.6 million for the taxpayer. In present value, that's $1,391,000, or 8.89% of the refunded bond issue. We look at that ratio, that PV savings as a percent of the refunded bonds, to tell us, is this a strong refunding? Are you getting your bang for the buck on a present value basis after paying costs of issuance? And typically, we look at that threshold as 3%, but this is well over that with 8.89%. Now, to be conservative, because we know we're going to have a Fed rate increase here in December, there's a lot of talk about that. We'll see what the language is for the next year, but many people expect maybe at least 2 or maybe 3 rate increases next year. So we've put a cushion of 0.75% in this option. So we're trying to give you a little cushion to be conservative as we look at next year. Hopefully things will be better than that, but at a minimum, that's, a very nice savings of $1.6 million to the taxpayers. Now, something to think about between now and the time get ready to go to market to refund these bonds is that this is the referendum debt service. And as you know, your current schedule climbs from about $7.5 million of payments up to $9.9 million. After the refunding, it'll be less. That's about $700,000 of savings a year out on that long end. But if you wanted to restructure that debt, either to cut off that peak or to allow yourself, as you plan, perhaps for another referendum somewhere down the road, those are the things we want to think about on those referendum bonds. We don't want to just refund them in the same structure they are without regard to what your future financing plans may be. So we have time. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but we have time to think about that between now and next October. But at a minimum, it's a wonderful opportunity to save taxpayer dollars. So here's a picture of that. Those hatch mark bars at the top represent the savings on the referendum bonds, 2009A. So now the 2009B bonds, those are the DSEB bonds, and the structure we've proposed for refunding those is to actually shorten the debt up, because the quicker you pay it off, the less interest you have. And in fact, if you shorten it up, you can actually cut off about 2.5 years, almost 3 years on your repayment. So substantial savings here. The total dollar savings are $605,000, net present value about $325,000. PV savings as a percent of bonds refunded is 6.78%. So again, another very strong refunding. And we've also put that 0.75% cushion in this option. So you don't have to shorten it up or accelerate it. You can keep it the same. Or this is something to think about on the next few slides. You'll see some options for issuing new money payable from this debt service extension base at the same time you refund these bonds. So that gives you savings, allows you more room to issue new bonds for capital projects. And let's get into that. So here's a picture of the savings, the accelerated refunding. The hatch marks represent debt service savings. The refunding impact on the taxpayer is not as dramatic. Given these two structures, you can see this is a $300,000 home. We're talking about $5 or $6 in the first 5 years, then $16 a year, then $38 and $42 a year. That's from shortening up that debt. So altogether, $163 for the owner of a $300,000 home. So now we're going to look at some new money options. So we did 3 options. There's obviously tons more. This is new money paid off with your DSEB, your debt service extension base. And as we mentioned, the idea behind the DSEB, it's under the tax cap. It allows you to extend those payments as long as they don't exceed the amount that was paid in 1994 plus a CPI factor. So the whole idea is you're not increasing the payments, you're just extending the payments to bring in some additional funds. So we did a 10-year option, a 15-year option, and a 20-year option. Okay, so going out just 10 years with this refunding, that would generate about $1.4 million of new money working cash proceeds. The beauty of this option is that it gives you more non-referendum capacity in 10 years, in 2028. You also still have savings, not as much, but you still have savings from that refunding. In this case, about $259,000. Here's a picture of this option. So the light blue bars represent that additional $1.4 million. If you were to go 15 years out, you could access $3.3 million. This would be repaid over 15 years. This is a nice option, but it does tie your debt service extension base up till 2033 or 15 years. So it would mean unless interest rates really dropped and there was an opportunity to refund, you might be locked out for a number of years. But still produces savings and gets you additional funds in October 2018. So here's a picture of that. You can see how that extends another 5 years to levy year 2032. Last option is going out all 20 years. This is a maximum maturity under Illinois law. So this again is refunding the bonds. Refunding savings is lower in this case because we need to stretch those bonds out a bit to make room for the new money. So this generates $5.3 million, but does in fact tie up that debt service extension base for 20 years. So let's go to that picture. So you can see the light blue bars going out all 20 years. that does kind of tie your hands for a while in terms of new non-referendum bonds. But get you the most proceeds. So if we summarize these options, we've got the PV savings from the non-referendum refunding, the PV savings from the referendum bond refunding, the estimated bond proceeds. Option 1 is about $1.4 million, option 2, $3.3 million, and option 3, $5.3 million. And keep in mind that cushion we have in here, if the rates are not going up 0.75% like we've assumed, then you're going to get more money out of each of these structures. So it could be worth another $100,000 or so.
And the EAV used, is that taking into account our new building projects that are expected? Or just what we currently have?
Just what you currently have.
So as those come online?
That will make the tax rate lower. Yeah, for sure. We've been very conservative with the EAV because that really just affects the tax rate. So I'll just pause here. I've kind of gone through a lot. I know you've got a lot on your agenda tonight. Are there any questions?
I mean, this has definitely been a lot to process. And for some of us more than others, well, including me, this is a lot. If you have any questions, as you said, we do have some time to kind of decide this. If you have some questions, I think we'll send them to Nick and get them answered. And maybe if we have you come another time to kind of, because I think we definitely need time to process this and, you know, put our thoughts together in words and numbers as we, with Abe's help.
So. Abe, did you have any thoughts on any? Because if you send questions to myself and Abe, then we'll craft questions and ask Elizabeth to come back. But I don't know, Abe, your thoughts in looking at this of just the initial.
I would suggest just reading through this once more on your own time. It's a lot of information. It's what I alluded to with the tax levy, with the DSEB, and there was interest in this. It's an opportunity. As you know, our fund balances will be less after the construction of this project. It's an opportunity to build that fund balance back up again, especially in that month of May, which is our low point.
Would there be any restrictions on what we can use the money for if we do option 1 or 2 or 3? Does it have to be like only for capital improvement, or can it be fund balance in general?
If they're tax exempt, it has to be for capital improvement, and you have 3 years to spend the money.
So that if we go with option 3, $5 million, we'd have to spend that in 3 years.
That's right.
Done that in 5 minutes.
Oh, I never thought that would be a problem. So on page 18, you've had the refunding impact on the taxpayer of 163 average if we do the refunding. If we do option 1, 2, or 3, do you have similar numbers as to the impact on a $300,000 home?
I do, not in this presentation, but I'll tell you, you know, you see the 38 and the 42 on the end? That would go away because we'd be filling that in with new money bonds.
Yeah. So
the savings would go down by at least.
Yes, it would go down, but would it ever go positive? In other words, in order to get $5 million, are we adding to the taxpayer?
You're extending it. You're extending the taxpayer burden. So you can't get something for nothing.
Yes, understood.
Right? So
what's the impact? Is
the
is
impact
what we're trying
is,
to quantify.
Yeah. So they, instead of getting the $38 and $42 savings at the end, they would get zero savings there. They just keep paying the same amount that they were paying.
So how about in years 20, 30, and beyond, would those have a positive number? In other words, the impact to the homes would grow, or would it just
versus
say,
what you're paying now?
Yes, compared to
it
what
would grow by CPI. You know, we've assumed just 1.5% CPI. We'll see how that goes, but it would just simply grow by CPI. So continuing to pay what they have been, plus that factor for CPI.
Is that something we can get in terms of something similar to this, but assuming we went with option 1, 2, and 3,
Sure.
what the impacts years 2029 going forward would be, how those numbers impacting the $300,000 home would be. I think that would be good to know.
Do you have somewhere the total costs that will be paid for this money?
The interest cost or the cost of issuance?
The total cost.
The cost of issuance are assumed in each of these options, and they're assumed at about 1.5% of the par amount of the bonds issued.
What about the total amount paid back for the amount of money we receive?
The interest cost?
No, the total cost.
So,
Yeah.
cost of issuance plus the interest cost is all included in each option, but for assumption purpose, we've put down the interest rates we're assuming, and I told you that included 0.75%, and the cost of issuance are 1.5% of the principal amount or the par amount issued, and those are included in each option as well. And that includes your rating fees, your bond counsel, your underwriting fees, all of those fees.
So in the options 1 through 3, though, that's the net amount that the district would
That's correct.
add. Okay.
That's correct. Net amount of proceeds to the district, right, after costs.
No, so if we extend the bonds, when we're all done paying that extension off, how much will have been, do you know the number of how much will have been paid to capture that additional amount?
Sure, so I think we can probably figure that out. So let's use option 1, for example. Now, on the 1.4 million option under the green heading, you're paying a total principal and interest of $1,701,550. See that number at the bottom of the column? So if you just do the subtraction there, you can see it's about $300,000 of interest plus the cost of issuing the bonds for option 1. Does that make sense?
So to get 1.3, it's about 200,000 in interest.
Yeah, about 300,000. The cost of issuance are only going to be like $20,000 of it. Mm-hmm. So the interest cost is the main thing on the 1.4 million for sure. Yeah. And that's the 10-year option. That makes sense? I want to make sure I get your question answered.
You just shoot questions to us. We'll collect them. We'll send them. We'll come back with answers, and we'll arrange a time for Elizabeth to come back and answer more questions. But there are opportunities for the board to consider.
Absolutely.
And really, they have October of 2018, I think, was the date that you and I had talked about at one point.
Right.
So there's time for them to make an informed decision on what they need to do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Is there anything different or new since the last time some of these options were presented?
Really, we're within almost within a year of the call date. So we've been watching the 2009s for you. There's also the 2002 and 2004 bonds, which are not callable. But the biggest new thing is really this Tax Reform Act, if that goes through. That's causing a lot of gyrations.
So in general, that if that goes through, interest rates will just go up for us, our cost goes up?
You know, it's hard to say. Right now, in front of it, people are rushing to market, making rates go up. If it goes through December 31 like they want it to, then we think there's going to be much less supply in January and into next year, so that will make it a better time to issue bonds. However, let's say they don't get it through and it keeps hanging over our head, right? So there's going to be still a bigger rush. The other thing is, inflation is the thing that the Fed is constantly watching and worried about, which is why they're talking about all these rate increases. We haven't seen inflation, but if we do, that is going to be the trigger that's going to make bond yields go up. But so far, everyone's worried about it. Fed's raised rates over 0.75% so far since 2016. Yet, if you look at those graphs, long-term rates are going down. And short-term rates are also low. I mean, we just haven't seen rates go up. It's inflation that I think we have to worry about.
But bottom line, we can't do anything until October anyway, so it's all speculation.
Right. Certainly on the referendum side. On the non-referendum, we could pull the trigger earlier prior to this law going in, but, so we have a very short window. But honestly, when you refund bonds ahead of that call date, you're giving up a bunch of the savings as well. So I do not recommend rushing into it, especially when you're not sure. Are you going to add new money? Maybe, maybe not. If so, how much? I think all those things need to be discussed and farmed out, and I think we have the time to do it.
Anybody else?
So as far as the district's concerned, so we were presented with options. Now we would need, I would assume, from you and Abe, what would we do with this money? How would we use it? Why would we need it? So justifications and to actually going forward with something like this, other than the refunding, which is just basic saving money. Yes, okay, that's almost a no-brainer. But the other part of option 1, 2, or 3, we would need to have a long discussion as to why and what it would be useful.
We wanted you to see the options first, see what they were, because the world's changed a little bit from the last time we've looked at these. And so in December, we have one board meeting in December, but I thought we would present some information to say, here would be the benefits of any of the dollars. Here's the benefits if you just refund it, but here are the benefits of any of the dollars and what we think are the needs at this time. So then you can weigh that as you're looking at the questions you have as well.
This can go dovetail in with our master plan conversation as well.
And some of this, so some of this is there's an opportunity. You have no guarantees of what may happen if a question's put on in November. We have to have something in our back pocket for some additional work that may need to be done. So if you do a question in November, doesn't pass, we're full in all our buildings. Let's say you do the 15-year that offers you around $3 million. You've put it in the bank, wait to see what happens. Doesn't happen, then you have some dollars there you could use to try to help resolve some issues that are somewhere else. But that's not been fully thought out between Abe and I yet, but that's the type of thing that you'll be getting in December to share with you what we'd look at. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
That's good stuff.
Next presentation is Student Achievement at the Middle School Level by Dr. Lioli and Mr. Natal and Mr. Collins.
So this year, as in the past, we've presented information to the board on achievements from our each building when we get it. It's always kind of dragging here. A little different is that I've asked the principals to come. Today you'll get the middle school presentation, and in December you'll get the elementary school presentation. But I've asked the principals to come so they can share some of the things that they think are working well or help answer questions that you might have. So it kind of breaks it up a little bit, and hopefully this will be useful for you.
Thank you. Yes, we've heard that the 3-hour-long student achievement presentation in the past has been a little bit long for everyone, so we're going to break it up. So happy to be here with our middle school administrators, Mr. Collins and Mr. Natal, to help me present our middle school information on achievement and growth. And we always start with our strategic plan. This is our vision of what we want for our students. And when we talk tonight about achievement and growth, we're talking about lots of different kinds of assessments, but more importantly, we're talking about not just the assessments that are mentioned here, but that Hawthorn for a long time has invested in assessing how we're doing with the whole child. In our strategic plan, we want 100% of our students to meet or exceed their individual learning targets. And we've spent a long time at Hawthorn Planning Council talking with our administrators and teachers about what that means. We have lots of assessments by which we can measure growth on academic standards, but we also really feel like an important part of the educational landscape for kids and whether or not they're successful here is whether or not they like coming to school, whether or not this is an engaging place for them to be, and whether or not it's relevant to themselves as individual people. And so we have taken the time over the last couple of years to develop goal-setting documents, and all of our students engage in that process now. And so when we talk about individual learning targets, some of those, as you know, for your own children, are academic and relate to some of the assessments that we're going to talk about in a minute. But all of our students also set a personal goal, and they talk about how they can improve in lots of different ways. And then we talk about how they can measure that, because as we know, as adults, that's a really important skill to have moving forward in their lives. So last year, we took our first baseline of students who met their individual learning targets, and we're at 83% of our students who were able to meet or exceed their individual learning targets. And again, that means that they were able to meet 2 out of 3 goals that they had set for themselves, 2 academic and 1 personal. So we feel like that's a really important measure that we want to highlight right away in this presentation, that we're not just talking about PARCC tests and MAP tests and Ames Web. We're talking about whether or not students can meet their goals for themselves. And then we also want to make sure we're providing an environment that's joyful and engaging and challenging for our students. So again, this is all available on the district dashboard, but we have also been measuring whether or not we provide an environment that is joyful for our kids. And you can see those indicators here of choice and connectedness, collaboration, whether or not our students feel challenged, whether or not they feel like they have the ability to be creative and to communicate in their education as well. And so those are our baseline numbers. And we'll keep track of this because we know this is a leading indicator for student achievement. These things, and they're very important things that are lifelong for our students to be learners for the rest of their lives. So I wanted to make sure we started there because those are important for our district in terms of our goals. So tonight we're going to be talking specifically about student growth and achievement measures at the middle schools. So you'll see some tables where some things are blocked out. We're trying to just really direct our attention at middle school. And we always kind of give a background. What is the purpose of assessment? We do a lot of assessing, as I'm sure you're all aware. And there's lots of different reasons that we do that. And individually, we're looking for whether or not students are proficient at the standards that we've set forth or have been set forth for us as a district. We're looking at growth and whether or not students have a deep understanding of what we're trying to help them learn. We're looking at rates of progress. We're looking at formulating goals for individualized or personal learning, for interventions if a student is struggling, for students who are performing above grade level. We're looking to use the assessment information for individualized instruction, individualized programming for students to make sure we have the right materials, and making sure that we're using effective materials and instructional strategies, and to keep ourselves accountable and make sure that we're guaranteeing outcomes for our students. So here is the assessment overview just for 6th through 8th grade. There's a lot. And at the bottom, you can see there are common assessments there, and those are the common summative assessments that we have for all of our content areas, and those are by unit. So those are happening for all of our students as well. And the purpose of having common assessments was all of the assessment data that we're going to talk about tonight are common assessments, is not only that so that we can look at individualized scores for students, but that so that we can also look at groups of students. We can look at students compared to a norm. We can look at how effective our programming is. We can look at resources that we provide for specific groups of students. We can determine what professional development is needed. And how we're doing as an organization. So there's definitely a purpose for individualized assessment and then a different purpose for common assessments. So how do we look at these data in all different ways? And you'll see in a minute that there's a lot of different systems that we utilize to look at the data, and there's a lot of different ways that we break it down so that we can get the information that we just talked about. So what are our assessments telling us? We'll start with PARCC. It was our 3rd administration in the spring. It was the same format as the year before. It'll be a little bit different in the spring of 18. They're cutting down the length of the assessment by about 20 minutes in some content areas. It's 100% aligned with our standards. It's administered in English. We take it on computers. Some districts do not. They still have paper administrations. And it is offered with accommodations as needed for students with IEPs. I wanted to make sure that you all have this, and this is the same system that Illinois has been using for a long time to report out information on all of our districts and schools in Illinois. It's illinoisreportcard.com. So all of the information that's presented tonight on Park is available here, as well as our demographic information. So when you go to this site, you can look at anything with relation to our demographics, our financial picture, our environment, student environment, teacher demographics. There's all kinds of data on this site. And within this site, you can also break down the data a little bit more than I'll be presenting tonight. So for example, as a district, you can look at composite scores for Park. You can look at ELA and math. You can break it down by grade and demographic group. You can look at trends over time. You can look at achievement gap information that we'll be talking about by school and by district and by different subgroups that the state measures. And you can also look at these, which sometimes work when I'm projecting and sometimes don't. We'll see how they go. But we do have these performance scatter plots. So when you're looking to compare Hawthorn with other schools around the state or other districts around the state, you can get this scatter plot view also. We're the little red triangle because I'm looking at the district. If you were to look at one of our schools, all of our schools would show up on the scatter plot. And you can break that down by any, again, of the subgroups that Illinois talks about. So this happens to be a low-income scatter plot. So across the bottom are the percent low-income students. And here along this axis is how many students are meeting or exceeding their percentage of students. So you can see in our band of percentage of low-income students, this is where Hawthorn is performing as a summary. But then you can break that out by grade and by subject. So we can say for our percentage of low-income students by 8th grade in math, here's where we look. Here's where we stand as a district. So some really interesting information and ways to break out the data. Again, there's information on the 5 essential surveys, on student demographics, enrollment, mobility, teacher information, and there's information on our administrators as well here. And then obviously all the schools in the district. So this is always a good place to go if you're looking for lots of information on Park, which is our state assessment. I'm frozen. Hold on. Let's see if I can get out of this. All right. Okay. So as a district, when we look at our district level data, we continue to outperform the state in ELA and math. This is an interesting chart that ECRA developed for us. So this is comparing our schools meeting and exceeding percentages on Park with the rest of the schools in the state and determining our percentile within the state. This is excluding District 299 or CPS. So these are all the schools in Illinois outside of CPS. So in 2016, for example, at Middle South, when we had 60.1% of students combined meeting and exceeding standards in ELA and math, that put us at the 93rd percentile of schools in Illinois outside of Chicago public schools. So it kind of gives you an idea, although the percentage seems a little low, maybe in terms of how many we have meeting and exceeding, when you compare to the rest of the schools in the state, a pretty good number. And then you can see on the left hand where we are in 2017 for Middle South and Middle North. So we had a little bit of a drop in the percentile for the combined scores. These are the ELA scores for 16-17. So again, a little bit of a drop in both. And then these are our math scores for the two middle schools. We saw a little bit of an increase at Middle North there for the math schools, for the math scores. When we look at our achievement gap information, this is district-wide. We continue to see large achievement gaps at Hawthorn. And you can see when you go to this on Illinois report card, you can hover over these numbers and see the exact percentages of white students versus Hispanic students. The blue bar is the state, and we're the green bar. These are our biggest comparison groups, our low-income versus non-low-income students, Hispanic and white students, and then the students with IEPs and students with not with IEPs. Those were reading, so this is the reading score, and this is for math. And again, all this can be broken out by each school and lots of different demographic groups at IllinoisReportCard.com as well. So when we look at trends, although we continue to outperform the state, we still do see those big achievement gaps in these subgroups. And we see it, the biggest ones between socioeconomic levels and between students with and without IEPs. When we look in particular at our middle school scores, what I tried to give you an idea of here is some highlights over the last 3 years. So we have our first cohort group of students who have gone through the PARCC assessment. At Middle School North, one highlight is our 7th grade team has increased the percentage of students. So this is not cohort data, but have gone from 51 to 56% of students meeting and exceeding in math. And then that same grade from 23 to 29% of low-income students meeting and exceeding in math. And then at Middle School South, our first cohort of students increased by 4 percentage points the number of students meeting and exceeding in math. So we've seen some bright spots in PARCC. We still have some achievement gaps, but we also have seen some improvements. And then maybe you guys can talk a little bit about the 5 essentials highlights and what you see as your strengths in the 5 essentials areas.
Sure. So I think with our 5 essentials, you'll see it on the school report card. If you go to the link that Dr. Sorali pointed out, it'll go over the 5 areas that our students and staff assess our school. So it's the students more or less telling us how, if they're challenged at school, do they feel safe at school? Is it rigorous? Are all questions that the students answer about both Middle School South and Middle School North. And then our teachers fill out an assessment as well of just the same. Do they feel valued? Are they being challenged, just almost like what Human X measures? And so we find that we get some pretty good feedback. In fact, Mr. Natal and I were just in Philadelphia speaking at a conference, and we walked into the gigantic room. I said, look at everyone's computers, because they had our school report cards up, and some people had our 5 essentials so they can prepare questions for us. So it is a valuable tool that paints a picture of not only what our staff feel about school, but also what our students feel about Hawthorn South and North.
And it's a little different because the students are able to report on the 5 essential survey at grades 6 through 8, but Illinois is actually piloting a student survey for the 5 essentials in grades 4 and 5 this year. So we'll probably see that student response come down into the elementaries as well. This is a biannual assessment. The 5 essentials, we don't do it every year. It's not required every year, but we do the Human X reporting every year, which you'll see in a moment. And we do use that to triangulate the data and look at our climate and culture in each of our buildings. So these were really good indicators at Middle North and Middle South. The darker the little tile is, the better off we're doing in terms of implementation. So what you have there are effective leaders, collaborative teachers, involved families, supportive environment, and ambitious instruction. These are the 5 essential components that we feel like are important for successful schools. Moving on to the Illinois Science Assessment, we will be giving our 3rd Illinois Science Assessment in the spring of 2018, and I have yet to receive any data to report to you on that. We are a little bit behind Illinois in grading those, so we will get that information to you as soon as it gets to us. Moving on to our MAP. So where PARCC is sort of correlated with the standards, MAP is an adaptive assessment. This is more of an individualized assessment, like a high-level overview of skills that we hope we're going from our curriculum and then generalizing into this MAP assessment, which, as you know, with students who have gone through this assessment, the questions are all different, and depending on how the student performs on the assessment, that's the kind of questions they get. So this is different for each student. And it's given twice a year, reading and math, to students in the fall. 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. But we've made an adjustment for kindergarten students. They now only take it in the spring of their kindergarten year. We have lots of measures for kindergarten and early literacy and math. And we felt like the first MAP assessment is probably a good idea at the end of that kindergarten year so that we could get a baseline. Hawthorn's been implementing the MAP assessment for over 10 years. We've done it in a little bit different ways and tweaked the administration over the years, but this has been a consistent assessment for us for a long time. And again, administered in English online on the computer with accommodations as needed. So what we have here in this graph are the mean RIT scores for all the students that take MAP in these grades in the spring. So you can see across the top, the mean is 225.3, and then you can see for each of our middle schools, we outperform that mean in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in math and in reading. So our students' average RIT scores on the MAP test far outweigh or outperform the norm for most students who take it. And then this is an interesting graph as well. So this gives us, since we take it in the fall and the spring, MAP can determine where we should be by the spring. And they kind of give us a projected growth level that we should see by the spring. And that is represented by the little diamond. So you can see that's where the students should get. And then the blue bar indicates where they actually performed in the spring. So you can see really quickly whether or not you've exceeded your growth projections. And you can see for reading, Middle North did have the exceeding in reading for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Fell short a little bit at Middle South in ELA. And then in math, both schools in all grades met or exceeded their projected growth. This is a nice chart for us to quickly kind of see how we do there. And then we have this third piece of data that comes to us from ECRA. And this is where we kind of aggregate the MAP and PARC data together and get an idea of whether or not we're outperforming ourselves. So in terms of how we do every year with students, are we getting value added? Are we doing better each year for our students? And those are usually represented by blue, green, yellow, and red dots. Green meaning that we're doing as we've done. So we're performing as we have been, which could be good or could not be good, depending on how we did in the past with a certain group. Blue meaning that we have outperformed ourselves as we did in the past. So when we look at Middle, South, and North, we're right in there. We're kind of performing as we have in the past. And this is for all subjects on PARC. When we look at access scores, so when we're talking about the achievement gap and trying to support our English language learners, access is one of the assessments that we use. It's given by the state. It's administered to all LEP students in January of every year. It's a 4-part assessment with all the components of language. Some tests are administered individually and some in groups, but this is an assessment of English language proficiency. And when we look at both of our middle schools, we do see that Middle South is kind of outperforming where they have in the past in terms of their LEP students on the access test, which is really good news. The green is also good news because all of our schools were in the blue last year. So for us to even continue in the green is a good thing for this year. So we're doing really, really well with our LEP students. And so what we're seeing in terms of a trend is that, like I said, the fact that we're performing in the green is good because we were doing really well last year, outperforming where we had in the past. But the state has undergone some interesting adjustments in terms of access. So last year, the assessment itself underwent a standard setting process. So what they did was they adjusted the content of the test up to match the standards by which, on which we're assessed, the Common Core standards for English language arts and math. So the standards went up for the access test. When the scores came back, there were a high number of ELL students that were not able to transition out of ELL services because those standards were raised. And that happened across the state. And so how Illinois responded is that they sort of lowered the cut score to have students transition out. So we still aren't seeing a high number of kids transition out, but not as many as there were before they lowered the cut score. Historically, we're transitioning between 22 and 25% of ELLs out of services based on the access results. Last year, only 10%. Approximately, we're able to meet that criteria. And that is definitely, we're seeing that across the state. And so we've been looking at our resources in terms of staff and materials to make sure that we're supporting the students who need that extra support. So overall, we're continuing to outperform the state on PARC. And we're looking good in terms of MAP and those average RIT scores. Again, access looks good, but we still continue to struggle. Some of our subgroups in reading and math achievement, and those gaps continue to grow in a lot of areas. And so when we talk about action steps for improvement, this is really the important part of the presentation, which is what we continue to do to try to get better for our students. And I'm going to let these guys jump in whenever they feel like they want to. But I would say first and foremost, what we've been talking about a lot, and these two were both at Harvard a couple of years ago, studying how we can close those achievement gaps, is looking at culturally responsive instructional practices, inclusionary practices, and personal learning. So I don't know if you want to jump in on what that looks like in your buildings.
Yeah, I think with personalized learning, as Dr. Sarali had said, for the last 2 years, we've been doing student goal setting, which has been great because it not only combines the academic piece and what we want all of our students to know and be able to do, but it also incorporates the social emotional component with that personal statement and goal that students have. So I could say over the last 2 years, that's definitely been a component of personalized learning that's helped move us forward. I think in addition to that has been the ongoing collaboration that we've had between both of the middle schools. We take advantage of any of the early release time. We take advantage of Teacher Institute days, as well as the joint faculty meetings that we've put into place, and really have our staff working in departments to move forward.
So, and it's just like what Dr. Sarali talked about too with our formal assessments. The teachers are using that time to go over those assessments and discuss what is working, what is not working, who's mastered what standards, who has not mastered what standards, how do we get those kids to get it? So that also came out, Rob and I were talking obviously early this morning. It also came out at our Human X debrief, because we just had our conversations with our teachers, and their number one comment was that working together between both South and North and having those professional conversations and doing what's best for students. I think it's also noted to point out too, Lisa started the presentation with, it's more than the PARCC score, it's more than MAP, it's knowing the whole child. Our teachers hear that, and when we have advisory or we're having discussions with students, it's knowing not just how that student learns, what do they enjoy, what can we use to get them to get up by using their hobbies or their experiences or what's going on at home, and most importantly, just knowing authentically they're cared for and this is their home for the next 3 years before they transition to high school, that everyone's treated like our own sons or daughters within our building for those 3 years, in and out of the classroom. Kids strongly feel, and don't hesitate, especially now that we have the Chromebooks. It's kind of funny because we'll email the whole student body and you'll get at least 250 emails right back. Like, I hope you're having a nice day with a bunch of emojis. Or I know Thanksgiving Day when I was cooking, my daughter, Mary Catherine, was keeping track of how many Thanksgiving messages were coming through with little turkey emojis. But it's that communication and taking the time to respond. So what's going on? How can we help you? And kids know that they can get a hold of us Monday through Monday at any time.
I think another thing we've been very appreciative of was the activity bus. We know when we look at student achievement, if you're involved in extracurriculars, that's going to go up. That's provided access to so many more kids. And I think between our buildings, we have probably over 85% of students that are involved in some type of extracurricular activity. So we're definitely proud of that. Another thing to note is the investment in co-teaching this year. So we've been super appreciative of those extra LBS 1 staff members that we were able to bring on board, knowing that that is a target area that we're looking at and trying to help students that have special needs. And we thank you guys for that as well.
Yeah, and I know the students, when we meet with them too, and we'll do like little talk shows where the students will come in and we'll have like a format of what's going on. How do you feel about this? Are there any frustrations? Very appreciative of, I'm with my peers and I feel like I can do it. And even the comments from our teachers that we just met with too this past month before conferences is just blown away, especially our general ed teachers, how positive, not just within their classroom, but them as human beings, to ensure that we're doing what's best for all kids.
And I think to keep our momentum moving forward, we're both utilizing our school leadership teams. So we're meeting monthly with representatives from the leadership team, analyzing data, talking about these same professional learning community questions that we have, and just trying to keep everything moving forward.
I would say also that at the middle school level, articulation with our high schools is very important. We've had an emphasis on math the last couple of years, and we've seen some results in our math scores in PARCC and MAP in terms of making sure that we have rigorous and challenging outcomes for our students identified, and specifically in the area of mathematics. We had a writing in service that was cooperative with District 70 in Libertyville and Oak Grove and 128 to focus on the writing requirements that come full force freshman year in high school, and making sure that we have kids prepared for that moving down through our middle schools and then eventually into our elementary schools. I would say that our professional development program has become very responsive to the needs of teachers, particularly this year. In terms of personalized learning, there are book studies going on for growth mindset. We're talking a lot about differentiation and personalizing learning, instructional strategies that are good for all kids, as well as making sure that we're supporting our teachers in co-teaching and inclusionary practices. And I think we've hit a lot of what was there for middle. Anything else to add?
It makes me think too of Robert and I were talking several weeks ago too. When you see the report card and it talks about how many students are in algebra that are passing, I think you have to keep in mind too that our students are not just in algebra. We also have geometry classes, and it doesn't monitor those kids because most middle schools don't offer geometry as a class. And our collaboration with District 128, then we do have students that even outperform geometry that they're taking algebra too as 8th graders. There's some. We just met the other day of a little boy who will take calculus at Vernon Hills High School. So there's always somewhere that we can meet the needs of our students. So there's some measures that the Illinois report card, it doesn't measure for us. But we're pretty strong on once the students have mastered standards. I mean, we tool their curriculum for them, and that's the personalized learning. But was also, like we mentioned, the social and emotional learning, which is important. Are they ready for that step? You're 15, 14 years old. Do you want to be taking a class with an 18, 19-year-old? So just making and ensuring that it's right for the students.
Yeah. And I know through our advisory programs in both of our buildings, every other week we're meeting for 40 minutes to look at those social emotional impact that kids are faced with, particularly in the middle school, and helping them navigate the different things that arise for them. So we've had a strong program there with our advisory over the last several years, and it's definitely helped students form relationships with adults and feel comfortable enough to go to them to help them with whatever they're faced with. Maybe it's not academic, and that barrier is something that's social, and staff are able to intervene and help them, which ultimately will raise up our student achievement.
We will take questions tonight, but also just wanted to preface this by saying we're coming back the next meeting to present the elementary data, and then I can come back a third time to answer any questions in between if you have other questions after you've taken a minute to look at the data and been able to look at all the levels and all the assessments that are going to be presented. So don't feel like this is the last time that we'll be talking about it. But
and we'll send you this was sort of finalized today as we're working, so we'll send you the elementary one in the next day or two, so you'll have that prior, but it'll be in the same format where you'll see. So, right?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be helpful because obviously I had
yeah.
no time to process and think of questions. But this is, I don't even know if this is particular to the middle school, so this is really for Dr. Leali to answer. But at the Triple I conference, I saw that you were sitting in one of the same presentations I was, and I don't know if you caught the whole thing or just the trail end because I didn't see you until the end. But when it was talking about increasing achievement in minority students, and of course we have a lot of minority students and they don't all fall into the same minority, so it's a tough thing to reach. But what, if anything, did you take from that we aren't already doing? Because of course, when I look at all of this, even the dips are not major dips that we've had. It's not like, oh my God. But I, of course, don't like to see the achievement gap kind of go really nowhere. Mm-hmm. If anything, a couple of them, I think, got a little bit larger. So what can we do other than that list that you had already put up? What can we do to kind of address that? And if we have this achievement gap with our IEP students, and I know there's some overlap between IEP and some other subgroups, but if we have the achievement gap with the IEP students, what else can we be doing? Because most research shows that the biggest predictor of those achievement gaps is socioeconomic status. So how come our bigger achievement gaps are in our IEP students and not in our socioeconomic students? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. First, I would say that's really true, that there is a lot of overlap. between these groups. There are a lot of students that belong to one or more subgroups, and so there's definitely overlap there. I was there for the whole presentation. It was very interesting. I think a lot of those things, yes, we're aware of, and what we've been talking about as an administrative team, in the last couple of years is how do we bring instructional practices out? How do we open the doors to the instructional practices that are happening in our schools that are working and making sure that our teachers are sharing those, but also how do just as our administrators talked about, how are our teachers getting to know our students? And it's really not just about, like the presenter said, it's not just about the color of your skin. It's not just about where you grew up. Culture incorporates a lot of different things. And, we've been staffing to try to become more diverse. We've talked a lot about adding staff and doing professional development on inclusion and inclusionary practices, but what it really comes down to is getting to know our students and where they're coming from and what matters to them, and becoming, like we said, culturally responsive, which doesn't always necessarily just mean language or just mean how a student processes. I've been working with one of our parents who also works on the park board for Illinois, and we've been talking a lot about social justice. This is not something that's particular just to Hawthorn. This is something that we're seeing across the country. And when we talk about that, there's a lot that comes up, as the River Forest superintendent talked about. It becomes an uncomfortable conversation because sometimes you have to really confront any kind of personal feelings that you have or perceptions that you may have about a group or some groups of students or families. And what really needs to be brought out into the light is we have some kids who have some obstacles that are different than other kids. And we've got to try to eliminate those obstacles if we can and provide the right supports for them as individuals. And yes, there are ways to compare like peers and to talk about, trends among groups of students. But ultimately, when we go to the PLC conference every year, we hear the same message. This is about individual students. This is about making sure that we know them, they know themselves, and they're able to set that goal, know what they need to work on, and we're able to help facilitate that with their families in a constant communication. So, like I said, we've been doing a lot of study on it. We've been setting that as part of our agenda to look at instructionally supportive environments for our very diverse population. There's been a lot of outreach that's gone on, especially in our Title I schools for parents. We've retooled our parent-teacher conferences to become. They happen more often every year, and they're more instructionally focused and more focused on assessments and data, supporting our parents to understand what the assessments are, and then also to help monitor their kids at home. So really trying to giving them the tools so that they are able to kind of keep doing those assessments at home and feel really invested. We don't have the answer just yet. And I think that was the message that I took away from that particular session was that we have to be pretty united as a board, as an administrative team, as a team of teachers and staff and faculty and families to address that as a community. We really have to make that a priority for ourselves as a community to make sure that what we're doing for all of our kids is equitable and is allowing all the students the opportunity to get what they need, which might not be the same as every other student, And so we continue to study that. We continue to work through professional development that way, to work with our Bilingual Parent Advisory Council, to work through our Parent Curriculum Committee, to work through our Oversight Committee, lots of different ways to gather information on how we can make Hawthorn a more inclusive and responsive place for our students. But we obviously haven't hit upon it quite yet. So
I don't think anybody
continue to
has
work.
Found the magic.
Yeah.
But just like what Mr. Natal pointed out too, I mean, something I think that really changed at the middle school level was when we called Nick when he was still in Indiana and said, we really need an activity bus because we have so many, our district is so large that kids can't stay until 5 o'clock because mom's working or dad's working. I know I wouldn't be able to because I work. But having students have the experiences and creative and more relationships of not just being in athletics, but science Olympiad, math team, staying in the library and reading, tech club. There's just so much that goes on that kids can be a part of. And I mean, that's what really, I don't want to say keeps them in school, but they appreciate and have that love of learning. I know what we talk with our teachers are about. If they don't love it now, they're not going to love it when they go to high school. And I knew that from teaching high school for many years. You knew the kids walking in, this is not going to be their cup of tea because they had such a horrible experience. I know I was one of those kids in middle school. I absolutely hated it. But being there, that's what we talk about relationships a lot. And we talk about not just an advisory, but reaching out to students. You can tell when they walk in the door, the first second of school, what's going on, they'll tell you everything that's going on. But the message is, it's okay. This is your home. You're going to have a great day of learning. And whatever you need, we can talk after school or during lunch or whatever it may be. We have supports for you. And not just our social workers, but all our grade level teams, are absolutely capable of having conversations with students. Am I missing anything, Rob, with?
No, I think you covered it. The authentic relationships are really what we're after. And having our staff help be able to identify what is the need for an individual student, like Lisa was saying, and then diagnosing that and then putting the right supports in place so we can move them forward.
And I think what's kind of unique too is the kids know we kind of check up on them when they go to high school. I love going to Mundelein High School because their cafeteria is right across the hall from their administrative offices. So our meetings are always at 11 o'clock. So the students will see you and they'll try to get out of class just so they can say hi. They tell you what AP classes they're taking or whatever it may be. But they, just like how Dr. Sorelli talked about to our relationship with our high school districts, it's not just a formal meeting. We're all good friends. We support each other, not even at the high school level, but all the middle schools that are around us. We're all good friends. We pitch in whenever needed and support each other. But most importantly, they communicate with us. This is how the students are doing at Hawthorn, and it's always positive.
We haven't dialed in the achievement gap, which is a little frustrating. We've been really putting a lot of effort in through professional development, trying some new things. Some things take a little bit of time. The full day kindergarten hasn't been here long enough for us to necessarily start seeing them in, but the personalized learning, the knowing the student individually, and some of our interventions, we're pretty confident eventually we'll start to see the results. But Dr. Leali had shared with me the conference, the seminar, and so the idea is let's find some folks that have figured it out and see, is there something they're doing or is there something, they're doing the same thing, but there's just a twist to it in some way we need to make a change in how it's being implemented to close that. And what we want to do is close it up, not close it down.
Well, right.
Yeah.
You could bring the top lower, but that's not going to be the idea.
Right. Yeah. We want to bring that. We want to bring that up.
Bring the bottom up
and try to
bring them both up.
Right.
Right.
And when I give the report from the III conference about what I saw, I'll share. I know it's not the board's job to worry about the means to the end. It's your job, but there were some ideas shared that I think are sort of worth at least tossing around and seeing if it's something that we think would even be worth our time and energy in a district like ours. But there were a couple similar districts on that panel to ours.
River Forest, yeah.
River Forest was probably a little bit more Caucasian than we are, but
yeah, I've reached out to the National Equity Project, which is one of those resources that they talked about there, and they have connected me with their Midwest representatives. So we're starting to get the ball rolling on seeing if we can get some outside support with helping with professional development on that.
Yeah, but a lot of their suggestions were very actually community oriented, way beyond the school district itself, which may be a little bit harder to work with, but it doesn't mean it's not a worthwhile venture. But.
No, but they did talk about institutionalizing, the comment at the end, institutionalizing some of our events. We've become much more inclusive of bringing family members to back-to-school bashes. We'll talk about this at the elementary level, too. We talk about curriculum nights and family nights, that the whole family is there then, providing childcare as often as we possibly can, providing translators, home visits, lots of home visits going on, and personal invitations, and the connection beyond our buildings, providing programming in conjunction with the library, and those kinds of things, so that it's.
There's lots of great things going on at the middle school too. Lots of great things. Aside from the activity bus, I think the advantage to having the model set up the way that we do is, if your kid's not connecting with one teacher, they're going to connect with a different teacher. So there's always that adult around that I think that they feel cares about them and what's going on, and they feel they can go to, and having that ability to come early or stay late and get that extra support, I think is huge, especially for the kids that can't necessarily get that support at home because mom and dad are working too many hours, or English is not their first language, or, good model.
you guys mentioned a lot of positive things, and it's really exciting to hear in terms of the learning and tools and resources and development of the whole child. So I'd like to commend you guys and your staff for the work that you've done, and you should be proud of that, and I am proud of what we're seeing in the middle school. I had a couple questions. You mentioned the map testing and what I would consider a big data set, 10 years worth of data. So how does that look in terms of trends from year to year for our students, as well as grade level year over year and what we're seeing?
So I can bring that data if you're looking in terms of I would look not too much past a 5-year trend, because they redid their norms in 2015. So when we started, there were a different set of norms, just because MAP had not done the assessment with as many students. So we can look at 5-year trends. I mean, we've definitely seen an increase in the percentage of students meeting their growth targets, their personal growth targets, in the last 3 to 4 years. Again, I mentioned that we've done it with different kinds of implementation schedules, because we haven't always done it 3 times a year, so the data isn't exactly the same. But definitely when we have looked over time at the amount of students who are meeting those projected targets, it's increased every year. In terms of grades, we typically see less students at 2nd and 6th. When we talk about that, though, we know that that's also different assessments. So MAP is a set of 3 assessments. It's not just one. So yes, it's adaptive for each individual student, but it's also 3 different assessments. The K1 test is called MAP for primary. It's read to the students. And then the 2nd through 5th grade test begins where the students have to read it themselves. And then there's a 6 through 8 assessment. And they're actually 3 different MAP tests. And so typically when I talk to other districts, they see a similar dip in 2nd and 6th, just because the assessment is different. But we definitely can look if you're interested in more of like a long-term trend on the MAP data. We can certainly look at that.
One of the big trends we see is our RTI data. We see by the time our students are in 8th grade, that number greatly diminishes. And I know right now, Rob, you have one in reading, and we have one receiving a Tier 3 intervention, and we're hoping we'll be Tier 2 or dismissed by January when we MAP test again. But
those would be students below the 21st percentile.
Yeah, students below the 21st percentile on MAP. So I think the trend that we see with that, we're looking at that too, is even when the kids exit from RTI, they're still supported and receive some type of support to enable them to be successful in the classroom environment. But I know right now, I mean, with meeting with about our 8th grade, because they're getting their schedules right. They're ready right now for District 128 and Mundelein High School. We're working on that with them. And I mean, they're ecstatic that by the time students are like in the 8th grade, especially around the holidays, we're either at 80%, if not higher, 90. I think we're about right now, students meeting and exceeding over the 40th percentile on NWEA. But just different trends we pick out. I mean, right now, I think between both our schools, we're at 54%. Students are at the highest end of meeting and exceeding, which has been very different data in the past 5 years. But
Yeah, I mean,
positive
the longer-
and negative,
the
I
longer
mean,
they're
it
with us,
just,
the-
we've had a lot of move-ins too, and that will fluctuate our data when we're analyzing that. I know right now we're at close to 60 move-ins, but the highest we've been at since the past couple of years. So those kids get plugged in, and we really don't get a clear picture sometimes of their past, or they might not have had a grading system or records, or so I hope that makes sense. I mean, there's different factors of the pie that fluctuate that data.
I think what we've seen is the longer they're with us, the better they're going to do. Specifically K to 8, but then when they enter in 6th grade, like Robert's saying, and then we exit in 8th grade, they've made tremendous gains in the area of mathematics and reading.
My other question regarding the Chromebooks, do we have students without home internet access, and have we been able to do anything to help them with that?
I can't really with anybody. I mean, it's
Handed out maybe 1 or 2 Comcast flyers where they're doing a significant discounted rate. We've had no one come forth and say that they're not able to connect.
I, for one, can say many students utilize the library after school. So if they need
Starbucks, don't go to Starbucks.
Yes, the Wi-Fi is there too.
Will you go to the slide for the map reading projected versus actual? Yeah. Minute. Okay. So obviously for Middle South, all 3 grades didn't meet the growth target.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that being addressed, and what's being done moving forward?
Sure. So I think one thing to keep in mind, this is only from one snapshot.
Sure.
So it's not a trend that we see over time. It is something that's concerning. We do have our leadership team who, we picked this up right in August when we had it, and started to put some plans into place. We have our literacy committee, which is a shoot off of some of our English language arts teachers. So we're looking at vocabulary development. That was one of the strands that was lowest as we analyzed this data. Knowing that 8th grade class are now freshmen, we're looking to really target that 6th and 7th grade class, who are now our 7th and 8th grade, so that we can see an increase. From the fall results, we have seen improvement.
But and so if you go to the next slide and you look at your math, obviously that's not an issue, right? Because you're meeting your targets.
But again, this is one moment in time.
I understand that.
I think this is where formative assessments come in really handy for our teachers as well, because again, so where MAP would say they're really aligned with Common Core standards, they're not quite as aligned as they would always say that they are, and obviously not aligned in terms of what curriculum is being taught in the classroom. We wouldn't call this a curriculum-based measure. This is a normed assessment that is a high-level assessment of a lot of different kinds of skills, regardless of when those skills are taught during the year. So they would take the test in winter. It's an adaptive test. The student may be encountering material that is at a grade or 2 above where they are, and might not have even encountered that material yet, or might be reaching back to things that have been taught quite some time ago based on how they're performing on the test. The best measure that we have of the standards formatively to help us with our instruction are our common formative assessments that are written off of the Guaranteed Viable Curriculum. So a lot of the work that we do at the early release days, and when we've started this year, actually bringing student work from the summative assessments and then formative assessments to look at across the district. So in this case, across 2 buildings, by grade level and department, to actually look at the work that students are producing. That's been the most beneficial thing that we could do to determine how students are doing on the standards and moving them forward with that. So we would look at MAP as that MAP is our universal screener. This is something that gives us information in terms of whether or not a student is struggling or how to differentiate for a student that's outside the box on the high end. But when we're looking at day-to-day instruction, only given 3 times a year, it's not really helpful to us day-to-day. The information is not fresh for long, So we're really trying to help our teachers define assessments that they can be giving on a weekly or bi-weekly basis that would be really tied to what they're instructing in the classroom, and then helping us articulate across the district and moving students forward, if that makes sense. So like Rob said, this is a good indicator for them. We look at it in the fall and put some plans into place, and hopefully in the winter we'll see some increases in that and students moving towards reaching their projected proficiency. But just always want to keep in mind what that assessment is, and versus what Park is, versus what those common summit. So it's the whole picture is really important.
But it is a catalyst to change. Right? Yeah. We need to do something.
And Wes, what I think is a good slide too is Dr. Leali. I think I use Sorelli.
It's okay.
Sorry, I'm kidding. The slide that she actually had illustrated with, this is the norm numbers. I mean, you're looking at just Hawthorn. Now, when you compare and contrast how Hawthorn is doing with everybody else in the country, from California to Maine, that's doing NWEA, I mean, our numbers are much, much higher, with both our schools that we're pretty proud of. And that's, especially when we articulate with our high schools, we make it a point of saying that's not just because of middle school. That happens kindergarten through 8. We're giving you a big present with a bow on it by the time the kids come to you. When you look at those numbers that Lisa has articulated there on that slide, that's some pretty good news for Hawthorn School District 73.
Oh, definitely. That one.
Yep. But it's good for us to see it, because then we can make plans.
And the other question I have, who works with the students to help them formulate or come up with their goals? Is that done in homeroom? Where is that done?
Homeroom. It's usually homeroom, and it's taking place during advisory. But
Okay.
it's articulated several times throughout the year, so the kids can change their goals. Or what's been really nice is ECRA provided us a new data sheet that we're using at the middle school where the students will write like a paragraph or so about themselves, how they learn, what they like, what they dislike. It has their data from when they were little people here at Hawthorn through current. So I guess to answer your question too, it makes me think we don't want it to be a stressor too for our students. So if you don't make your goal, there's more important things in life as well, even though we we look at that data, but we don't want it to be earth shattering for a child. Like, you didn't make your goal, you're going to make it next time probably. Or how can we articulate
Well,
that?
it's an important life lesson too.
Mhm.
When
I
you
think
don't.
where we really, place the emphasis, the number is one piece of it, but really that conversation and that conference time that homeroom or core academic teacher is having with each of the students. And not just on the academic side, we do place weight on that personal goal as well, so that they're developing.
And especially at the beginning of the year when the students compose their goals, especially in the area of mathematics and English, those teams are talking about those, like where they think those students are at, and then how can they surpass where NWEA is going to project them to be.
And then our entire staff, as well as the students and then parents, have access to view the goals and the action plan that students have created. So we can really be a collective unit to try to move students forward in their learning.
Did you have more questions?
No, that was it.
Off the top of your heads, it sounds like there's a slight advantage to kids that have been at Hawthorn their entire educational career. Do you know off the top of your heads how many of our 8th grade graduates have been with us since kindergarten or first?
ECRA utilizes cohort data, and you can see the numbers for ECRA when you look down at reports that would be specific to 8th grade. The numbers and the enrollment numbers go down because they don't incorporate students who haven't taken tests for at least 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
So it's definitely not our full enrollment of students.
No, I
but,
don't know if it was 20% or 50% or 1%.
Let me look, see if
We'll
I
have
can
to
determine.
look, yeah. But we do track them.
It'd be interesting to see who starts with us kindergarten and ends in 8th.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 50% of the population, or
Well, and it would be interesting to track their progress because is it really better and faster, whatever progress, than kids that have moved in? And, how many years does it take of consistency before you see those results?
Right.
We
And then
have
we
about
know.
a 10 to 15% mobility rate in each of our buildings. So you can,
That high?
pretty good, right?
let me do a little research to see if I can figure out that for you, because the mobility rate's nice to know, but
It doesn't
may not
account
give
for
us
multiple
quite the
years,
picture.
though. Mhm.
And it also doesn't account for, you might have someone move, come back, move, and come back.
Yeah.
The state doesn't recognize that, and that happens.
Right.
Oh, we're back like the 3rd time for the year. Welcome.
We still have your schedule.
Yeah.
Oh, love you.
Anybody else?
Please
Thank
email
you.
questions.
Before I always want to end these presentations with thanking our middle school administrators, Mrs. Khan, who's on leave, and Mr. Dengler's taking her place, Mrs. Trowbridge, who's new to our middle school administrative team, and all of our teachers this year and last year. They do a tremendous, tremendous job working on behalf of our students, and I just always want to thank them for all of their hard work and dedication and commitment to our vision that we've put forth in the strategic plan. We have a really amazing district that's committed to really great things for kids, and just always want to thank them for their partnership. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is the Human X report by Nick.
Yay! Okay, so this is the 3rd year for HumanX. This presentation is slightly different than previous 2 years because we now start to have 3 years of data. We're giving you some bar graphs for folks. So in this shows you how many participants have taken part each of the years, and you can see that our numbers have increased. Our first year were a little low, but oops, didn't mean to do that. But we have increased the number of participants taking the survey, which is good. We have 91 folks right here are non-certified. And so as our numbers increase, we have more people participating, we get more accurate information. We use that. It's 88 questions. They fall under 15 dimensions. There are overall ratings for those dimensions. And then anything that's a 4 or above that considers operational excellence is based on a 1 through 5 Likert scale. This gives us information on the rank order of the dimensions. You can see what we had as a mean in October of 16 and then of October 17. Everything went up except for the talent and fit stayed equal. Some of them made slight changes and some of them made some nice changes for us. But in underneath, like continuous improvement, there are multiple questions that are asked to get to that piece. So we like to see that we are trending up with these. We now have everything is in the 4 range under these dimensions. The original top 5 dimensions for the district, these are the things that were ranked the highest. Then engage and inspire, continuous improvement, pride, innovation, and quality. Those have also trended up a little bit over the last couple of years. We also have information on the original bottom 5. And there was a lot of efforts over the last couple of years to try to address some of those, increased in support, increased resources, increased time, training and development. Karen's done a nice job redoing and repackaging professional development options for folks. Also, just providing it at different times in different ways to help out. We've tried to improve our communication. Relationships are trending up here, and then recognition. And a lot of effort in the recognition in all the buildings, trying to make sure folks are acknowledged for hard work or efforts, and what's important for them in the way of recognition. You know, some folks like a personal note, some folks a nice conversation, but pointing out good quality work and efforts as we go. So we've seen those trending over the last 3 years. I included this as just a sample. This is what HUMAC sends out, that we want to try to get folks into the dream box. They're highly engaged, highly satisfied. And then if you have folks that are low satisfaction and low engagement, you're either trying to help them move out of there or determine if they're in the right profession, in the right organization. And so we're trying to help figure out where to go. And so we're really targeting the dream box, if at all possible, for those closest to it. For this year, our dream box score is 75.75. Last year it was 73.24. The little gray box shows you what was last year's scores off of the survey. Each building gets one of these, and I'll be sending you out a report sometime this week with some more information for you to review. This is an overview on stuff. And so we're pleased to see that we're going up. And I believe that the district or the industry average is somewhere around 64 or 65 in education. It's 35 in general employment. So it's a little higher in the world of education. So we've trended up here. We've seen it trend up in some of the buildings. Let's see here. I am missing a slide. Oh, there it is. And then this is just a line graph showing you how we've trended. And then this shows for each building kind of what their scores have been for the last 3 years, if they've gone up or down and all around. And so we are pleased to see that we see some things trending up. Each building principal, the previous 2 years, we had an outside folks from HumanX come and help run meetings, and this year the principal sat. They go through the information, they go through the top 5, the bottom 5, they go through scores, and they have conversations about what can be done to help improve the work environment, how can we be supportive, what are some of the things that folks need, what's being provided that's needed, and then each building builds a plan off of that, still getting those back from the principals right now on what the efforts will be with themselves and the staff, and then that helps us look at district level. What do we need as a district level? What are some things that we might be able to do? What do we need to maintain that we're doing? And then what are some things that we might need to adjust, make changes? In the past, a lot of resources and PD made some adjustments in how things were delivered or provided to the folks. So we have seen some improvements over the last 3 years, and as a district and in the buildings, and we're working through those. It's as you heard, the 5 essentials is given every other year. We do this each year. gives us a kind of a mark on our culture. It's part of our strategic plan. And so we're working to try to make sure that folks are feeling connected to the district, feeling cared for, that they have, they bring value to the work. They have a chance to provide value to the work. One of the big things we've really worked on as an administrative team is trying to listen and really just sort of slow down, just listen to what our parents or our students, but even our staff in this situation, what are they telling us, and what is something they've got a good idea, or they have an issue we need to try to resolve. And so really trying to slow down and listen to understand where people are at in their careers, what their dreams are, what their needs are. So like I said, I'll send out a report that gives you more details on this, but we like to see that we are trending up, and we hopefully will continue doing that. If you have questions, I can answer them now. I can come back to this too. If you think of something as you get more data, come back and answer other questions. This isn't a one-time stop on this.
Is there any correlation between satisfaction and staff experience?
I will have to ask them and look. I haven't seen it here because it's anonymous, so it doesn't break it out by how many years of experience you have in that. But I can see if I can find some way to gather that information. One of the things, satisfaction correlates to longevity many times within a district. And in schools, one of the things that they ask about is professional growth opportunities. And in schools, if you're a teacher, professional growth opportunities or maybe some leadership opportunities within the building, or you're going into administration. And then you're either an assistant or a building principal, and then from there you might go into a district level. Besides that, then it's leadership opportunities within the building or some coaching. But I'll have to ask on that. But usually there's a correlation between some longevity with folks if they're highly satisfied. Been doing a little research on teacher longevity nationally and then by the state to do a comparison to our numbers that we see. Right now I'm running, what I'm getting is around 12% turnover annually for teachers, but I'm trying to drill that down to make sure, national averages are okay to start with, but then try to get into a state and then areas of the state if I can find more information on that. But generally people that are engaged and satisfied will stay with you and keep working. The most important thing is those that are engaged and satisfied, even if they stay with you for 5 years and they move to another position or a different career, when they're satisfied and engaged, they're doing much better work for the students. And our profit is the care and instruction of our students. So that's the big key. If we can maintain these high numbers and improve them and try to support folks, should give us a better experience within our classrooms for our students, and then hopefully that will then correlate with improvements, like we said, hopefully closing achievement gaps, but making sure the kids feel cared for. But what's interesting with this is good for employees. It's the same thing that's good for students. So that you're listened to, you feel valued, you feel you have input and control over parts of your day, and that's part of the personalized learning is that advocacy for themselves, but then also some self-control over their day. So there's some correlations between those. Other questions?
Yeah. When you send us the detailed report, it might answer this. So, and you don't even have to feel like you have to answer this anyway. But in the trends by building, where there's been minor changes, not so concerned, especially because if you start out so high, you can't necessarily, nobody's going to get to 100% engagement and satisfaction. But where there's been really big gains, what's the magic? And where there's been significant dips, do we have any clue where that's coming from based upon the more detailed report? Like, so we know what we're targeting?
Yeah, and the more detailed report will give you some insight into that. And that's where we're working with the principals as they're working with staff. And so they're covering you as a person in the survey. They're covering administrative support and then as organizational. And so in one building, we noticed that, and this was last year, but what we noticed was what I call the I statements. I feel my team is a good team, or I feel I'm engaged with my team. Those dipped. And so, but the administrative support or something like that went up. So you target that, and it helps you sit with the team and sit with teachers. All right, so what part do we need to do to help as a team. So there are some pieces of information in there that we use. The more detailed report will give you some more insight into that. It's nice when you see a progression going up as opposed to the roller coaster, and the roller coaster is what we're trying to figure out what might be occurring. If it's a building that has consistent staff and it hasn't had a lot of turnover, then we got to figure out what's happening. What's happened is something has changed, either from the I statement or the administration or the district level. Something's occurred that's caused it either to go up or go down.
Right.
So you'll get some more information. Hopefully that will then, I'll try to provide some answers of what we've seen.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else? I had a question. Whether this is mainly concerning where we see a dip, even though we find what is the cause for it and we know how to rectify it or at least address it. This is an yearly thing. So is there any way we know that what we are doing is working towards a halfway mark, because we don't want to wait an year to know that, the things that we are putting in place to remedy the stuff is working or not. So is there a way we could figure it out earlier than a year?
There's not a formative piece for Humanix, but we have our surveys that we send out after PD and meetings, and that gives us feedback and it gives us some insight to many components that are part of Humanix. And then the principals working with their staff, they are working with their leadership team to gain feedback. Some of them do some surveys through the year, and some of them just sit with their leadership team and say, all right, let's say for recognition, we wanted to do something. One of the buildings does a nice job with recognition that beginning of each staff meeting, staff members recognize another staff member for something that they've contributed or felt supported on. And so then the principal has conversations with the leadership team. Is this authentic? Is it helpful, or do we need something else? But so that we're doing it through those more formative pieces there.
Anybody else? You can always send the more detailed questions after the report comes out, so it can be addressed. And we can kind of have a summary of, if there are a lot of questions that come, so we can address them or talk about them at the next meeting.
And I would just like to let the board know that, again, it is a catalyst for conversation to try to make change, to improve the working environment for folks. It's not given and then ignored. It is a piece that we work on, and we really are trying to help create a really collaborative, collegial environment for our staff. And I truly believe that bleeds into the students. The teachers take that same practice into their classrooms. So we hope that will help. But thank you. I'll send you more detailed reports, and then any other questions, just email.
Next is the 2018-2019 student fees.
Good evening. As you're aware, in 2017-18 for this school year, we did increase fees last year. Probably recall some long conversations in regards to that. The recommendation for this year is that we keep everything the same as last year, except the one area where we're required to increase the lunch fees by 10 cents, and that's to conform to the equity in school lunch pricing mandate. The overall revenues represent 0.58% of the Ed Fund revenues, so it's a very small piece of the overall revenue. And with that, are there any questions as it relates to the proposed fees for 2018-19?
Oh, I had a question. So the lunch fees we would increase because we're required to, but we wouldn't have to do anything for breakfast or milk for the same reasons or requirement.
It applies to lunch, and that is the only area we need to increase.
Okay, so the requirement only applies to lunch, not to the breakfast or
to
milk.
Lunch only.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to confirm that. So the requirement is only for lunch.
It's the National School Lunch Program.
Yeah.
So.
Any other questions?
So that's all the way for next year?
Yes.
For next school year,
right.
Correct.
And so that'll come before the board for...
probably in December.
Next
for
month.
approval next month.
Get that taken care of and let people know.
Now here's my question. The lunch is this, I mean, it's almost, a semester early with the national lunch program, and that normally stays like we wouldn't have to do anything between now and August. Like nothing would, like if we approve it next month, so between then and August when we start the school, like for the lunch fees, nothing would change between now and August.
No, it would be as proposed.
Okay. No, I didn't mean you would, but the requirements wouldn't change by them.
Would anything change in the environment that would come back and say, no, you got to raise it by another 10 cents?
No, there's a calculation that's done to determine how much we need to increase for next year.
Okay.
And that's been completed, and that reflects a 10-cent increase for lunch for next year.
So the calculations and everything is
It's complete.
Oh,
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. The next topic for discussion is the Educational Facilities Master Plan. Now, everybody has all the materials they needed. We had the presentation with a lot of the facts that were repeated, along with some of the logistics that went into that discussion. So the question is, so one of the things is the EFMP, which is the Educational Facilities Master Plan, is a 10-year plan. It is to solve our space needs and our programming needs. It is meant to sustain our growth. It is for the next 10 years. It includes some of the educational programming as well as the needs that we would have. We have for programming such as our bilingual and special ed and everything, space that we need for those, as well as music and band programs and PE things. We are in the process. We have a design team now going on. We approved the schematics for the kindergarten center, which would move all the kindergartners, other than the kindergartners at dual language, into the kindergarten building, which is with the IGA with the Park District. This would give us spaces of about 3 to 4 classrooms in each school, 5 in elementary south, which will probably be backfilled by some of the displaced programmings that we have. It doesn't give us any relief to any of our middle schools. This was a plan that was created with community input, the architects, the things. Nothing has changed since that plan was put into place. Other than the fact that we have a kindergarten building that is getting built, which will start giving relief in 2019. The space constraints are still the space constraints. No new space has come available that we can go into or look into. The administration and the architects have been on lookout for this. Nothing has come up that we can buy. We haven't won a lottery or gotten an endowment, so we are still in the money needs that we had. Money is still the same. Nothing is, actually we are low now because we've spent some of the money from our reserves for the kindergarten building. So based on that, and we had the survey, which we answered the questions. We know some of the community input that we have gotten already. So based on that, I wanted to know, and this is one of the many discussions we will have. At the last meeting, we did, as a board, decide that if we decide to go to the referendum, it wasn't decided, but if we decide, it would go in the November time. We wouldn't try to rush through it at March, but whether we are going for referendum or not wasn't a decided factor. If we decide to go, it would be for the November 2018 ballot. So we still have to address our educational needs, our space needs, and based on that and all the information that you have, we're going to see what we want to come up with. As I said, this is the first of the many conversations we will have. We'll keep having them to a point where we can reach consensus. So who wants to start with what they think the EFMP or what the plan should look like? What are their first thoughts, first ideas? Anybody want to go? Julie.
I wanted to talk about an approach to gain community support before we even maybe start making decisions, because we've answered the community's questions, but that doesn't mean that anybody's mind has been changed.
No, but we have to at least decide what we want to do before we go out. What are we asking them to support or not support? We don't know that. So we need to have a decision first made to see if they will support it, right?
Yeah, but
Even
I think that there's steps and things we can do beforehand. When I was at the conference, one of the school districts, which was smaller than ours, but a very similar makeup, before they even talked about and really decided for referendum, is they invited people to come tour the schools and look at their space. And they asked the community, well, it's obvious that it's crowded, but do you want us to move forward and do you care? And this was to extend bonds. This wasn't even asking for a referendum passed. But they wanted to see the community's support before they even move forward. So if we invite some of our community members to tour our schools, and after they tour it, get some opinions and see what they think, and then start building things from there.
And I'm just trying to understand this fully, because so you would want them to come and tour the building. So maybe 20 people came, maybe 200 came. That's still not the 17,000 that we have as our registered voters.
Yeah, but once you start gaining community support, they can be a big drive in changing other community members' minds.
Okay, but here's the thing. If they come in through the schools and they decide we have to do something, but they don't know what you're planning on doing or what that price tag is, and that could change their perception all the way. So now we have spent the...
Yeah, but they're at least on your side to some extent, instead of, being on automatic no, which we obviously had 60% of. I mean, we don't know that answering their questions has changed anybody's mind.
The question is not whether we are going for the support. The question is, what do you think of the plan, and what do you want to do about the plan? So do you want to change the plan? Do you want to keep the plan? Do you want to add something to the plan? Do you want to take something out of the plan?
Can I interject for 1 second?
Sure.
So if I'm understanding Julie correctly...
Please translate.
I don't know. I take no responsibility for translating, but if I'm understanding Julie correctly, I think she's more concerned about community support for the district and the board as a whole, whether it's about this particular topic or not, and what that does for the problem that we have of there was at least a significant portion of the people that just didn't even believe we had a problem to begin with. Which is, if you can't even get them to believe that there is a space problem, they're certainly not going to believe that you need a millions of dollars of solution to that problem. And I think that I don't know necessarily what the right answer is. I don't know if it's building tours or, whatever. But in one of the things that I went to at the III conference that I think 5 of us ended up sitting in, about going back to referendum after it's been defeated once, they mentioned how much feedback they took from the community the second time around that was not taken the first time around. The first time around was, here's our plan, do you support it or not? Second time around was taking tons of feedback about what do you want your schools to look like? Where do you want the location of the new building to be? And taking that and working that into the plan where possible. And then you get a little bit more buy-in. So I don't, my prediction, if we were to hold building tours, 10 people would show up. And it'd be the same 10 people that supported us the first time. But it doesn't mean it's not worth sort of bouncing the idea around to see if that's a good spend of our time and effort. But yeah, I mean, I do think it's still worthwhile, though, to Sonali's point, to still talk about what do we even want this project to sort of look like, because that is going, whether you hold building tours or not, that is going to be a question that they're going to ask, is where is this going? What's your purpose? What's the point?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's going to sound like an odd question, but remember, we have 3 new board members on here. So the question that I would ask first is, does our current board, because we have 3 new board members, understand and believe or support the idea that we have a space issue, that we need to do something coming up, that doing nothing is not an option, that we have to create some space? And so I guess, just for myself, kind of going to just the basics, if the board's unified, yes, we have a space issue, we need to do something. Now, what we do, we don't know, but we all agree there's a space issue, would maybe the first step. And then front loading, as I'm listening to Julie, I'm thinking she's talking about front loading the message while you're working on the solution, but
well, I'm just taking some suggestion on the solution, I guess. Because if we just sit here and we say that these are our plans, I mean, I just don't, I feel like it's more just like cramming down what we want.
The process
But
that we
ans-
did go through did get a lot of suggestions from the public. We had a lot of public meetings. We presented all the different plans. We had all these different stations where they could talk about them, offer up suggestions. I don't,
Was that
No.
before or after the plan was already in place, though? I
I-
felt like those
that's what I
meetings were
think.
after the plan was in place.
no, those were to form those plans, from what I remember.
I thought they were
to
after
get
first.
No,
there.
the October, the May meetings, the October meeting, the December meeting, they were all before the plans.
Yeah, we had a lot
It
of
was
meetings
before we
before
finalized,
the
but it was
final.
already down to option A and option B by the time October hit.
No, we had
Okay,
plans
here's the
even
thing.
before that to say, that's kind of where we got a lot of the, because before they gave us 4 options,
Right.
and then we
Well,
got feedback
3
on some of
really.
those.
I
Okay,
mean, the
did
fourth
those
was
did those
nothing.
meet? And that's where I remember we got a lot of feedback saying, well, this doesn't make any sense. Try this. You think about this, and that refined a lot of those options into the final 2.
Okay, let's backtrack a minute. Answer, no, the 3 of you, the 3 new board members, because you were not there on the board before,
Sorry.
is have to answer, have to agree that we have a space issue, and do we want to do something? How we get there, whether we front load your question by going to the people and asking them to be a committee of people, or we figure that out. But first question first, do you think you have a space issue, and do you want to answer it with an EFMP, or do you want to do nothing? Because we need to get a consensus of we want to do something, how we want to do it will be a discussion. But if there is nothing, then that's a different discussion we need to have. Because we as a board, as 7 of us, need to decide we have a space issue, we need to address it. Whether it's a dollar amount we need to come to a consensus to, whether we do nothing, whether we have a different creative solution, but we at least need to know that main question first, which Nick asked. So, Matt.
Space issue, yes. And I have ideas, and I have to go back and look.
No, that's fine. That's
But
not.
we clearly have the 2 middle schools that are going to need help, and elementary south is going to help. I think we need to get them and pare it down to a digestible.
As in dollar
We
amount.
have a space issue.
Right.
How we
And
address it is what the
exactly.
board will work through.
And that's the chicken and the egg thing. Fighting about which do we want to do first.
Yes.
Absolutely, we have space issues that need to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Julie.
Yes, we have a space issue, and it would be lovely for something to be done, but we can't do it without the community's approval.
So, would you mind if I interject?
Go ahead.
I'm going to assume, unless one of the previous board members that was on the previous have changed your mind, that you're still agree there's a space issue. And so with that, knowing that we're in consensus, we're in agreement, we have a space issue, we need to do something, then it shifts the question to, you have an EFMP, which is a 10-year plan. What component, how do you want to administer? We had asked for all of it. Now the question is, how do you meet those? And are there any changes in that? You've started to deploy the kindergarten component, which wasn't part of the referendum question, but you've already started to implement that piece. So then the next question is, what's in the EFMP that was created? Are there components on there that everybody says, yeah, I think this will solve the problem? And this is not for tonight, obviously for the next couple of conversations, then is, how do you want to address it? The kindergarten addresses elementary, so then do you go to middle? But then you have to tell the community and then ask the community, if we're going to go to the middle school, what components do you think we need to address? I know that this year we are currently taking pictures and videos of our spaces as they're being used. If the board asks for open up for tours, we could do that. I always have a safety concern with that when it's running. So we are trying to take pictures and videos that would be able to demonstrate to folks, here's what it looks like during the day, to hopefully start the conversation. But so now the next step is then, as you're working through this, what do you think's a key that you think you really need to use to solve, and how do you want to bring the community into that conversation then? Here's what we're thinking, what are your thoughts? Think is what you're saying a little bit with the conversation ongoing beforehand, and then say we're thinking of these components without recreating the EFMP, because I don't know that you would need to recreate the EFMP. It took a long time, a lot of people to do that. Within that is your solution. There might be some tweaks in there, but
I mean, the impression that I got is that it was just kind of known that there wasn't that much support and that it wasn't likely to pass. It was just a lot of money to be spent on something that likely won't pass. So I'd like to be able to come up with something that we really feel very confident will pass, is kind of what I'm getting at, instead of, keep throwing money at failing referendums, because I don't think they're cheap.
So you want to create a whole new EFMP?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where I'm at. I just don't want to do the same
what
thing.
What part of EFMPs do you not like? You are a board. You're an elected member. You read through this. You have the raw data. What part of the EFMP, as a board member, do you not like? Going to the community is a different aspect. I'm asking you as a board member. What part
But that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm not talking about what I as an individual like. I'm talking about
as a board member.
Right, but that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. I'm just talking about not my specific personal opinion. That I want to do something that's going to pass.
Yes, but you have to still decide what is it of the EFMP. If you want to go back and redo the whole EFMP, there has to still be a decision of what you liked and what you did not like about it that needs to be tweaked. We have to have, because even if we redo the EFMP, we have to give directives as a board. So we need to know what those directives would be. So
let me try. I think what Julie's saying is, we as a board say, yes, we agree there's a space issue. Her perception is the community does not have that same feeling and belief.
Right.
Or some part of the community does not have that.
They maybe don't care and they don't want to do anything.
So those are two different populations, because they don't care and they know about it. Then having a tour to show them there is a problem is not going to change anything.
Right.
So,
but at least it gives us that info that, like when you ask the community if they agree with you that they have a space issue, then that's one problem solved.
Yes. So,
and if they
to address that, does the community agree that we have a space issue or not? So, through many of our initial presentations, that was one of the big components of the presentation. Here's our populations, here's what the buildings were built for, here's how they are used. So we try to walk people through why we have a space problem, where the space problem exists. We kind of did that not by bringing people to the schools, but we kind of brought the information to the people. Okay, so if that didn't work, then if you're suggesting that, okay, now let's bring the people to the schools.
Let's find a different way to show
them. Find a different way. Okay, so my position, having a student in the middle school, as a parent, I know there's a space issue. I understand what they go through. I understand how the band room is overused. I understand how the gym space at Middle North, they're doing gym in different spaces that are not meant for that. So as a middle school parent, I kind of know that. I would hope that most middle school parents would also have that same type of information and would also know that. So then what population are we trying to convince? One piece at a time. Not that we have a whole space issue district-wide. How can we convince people that middle schools are an issue? Okay.
Well,
just pick out that one piece that we can try to solve.
I want to ask Matt and Wes something. I sat through a lot of those meetings, and you hear what everybody says, but until we went on those school tours, it was a very different perspective.
I was actually talking to some frustration when you ran is you heard all this stuff, and then you get to the actual facility, and it's a completely different story. The hearsay was significant during that entire thing. So you sit down here, and then you go through all this stuff, and you're like,
as a board, before it was presented, the information was presented over and over and over again, and the information really didn't change, and people still had the same perception. So we need to figure out how to change that perception.
And I don't have the number. I don't remember the number offhand, but the survey pretty much said that most of the community felt that there were space issues.
Exactly. So I don't understand why that.
I think it's more the plan. It's the problem.
Yeah. And it's the message and communicating the plan. I spent most of my time at III going to sessions about referendums. And
I went to community relations.
I did. One with Champaign District, is it 4?
4.
District 4. They successfully passed a $110 million referendum. And they did that through community involvement. It was a great session. I wish everybody on the board could have attended. Yeah.
That was their third attempt.
It was the third attempt.
And they got 40 more than they had asked for the first.
Right.
Yeah, the last referendum was more expensive than the first. Yeah.
Yes. But the third time around, they put together a committee of, 20 different community stakeholders, and they met every Thursday for 3 months. And they came up with $300 million worth of needs, and then they whittled that down to what they went and asked for.
See, well, that's kind of what I'm looking for is a little bit more community input before we just start making decisions. Or, I mean, I know we're not making a decision for a referendum.
That's kind of what the survey was.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't remember right off the top of my head if the survey had this level of nuance, but the feedback I heard a lot before and after the vote is even for the people that believed that there's a problem, many did not believe the CASARTA projections. So, or they thought, even if I believe them, we should be going with projection B and not projection C. And a lot of that sort of nuance of going, yes, there's a space issue, but how long do I think this space issue is going to exist and how much worse do I think it's going to get before I decide whether or not I'm going to do anything about it, right? And sorry to say, but most people are not going to open their wallets if by the time this gets resolved, their kids aren't even in the district anymore. So I think when I look at that type of feedback and I hear that type of feedback, what I hear is there's a trust issue. There's people who go, okay, sure, I will grant that there's a space issue. Maybe I've seen it in my own kids' building. Maybe I just believe you anyway. But I think that based upon data that's been wrong in the past with CASARTA or projections that have been exceeded or not met or whatever, I don't know whether to believe it this time. And I don't 100% know what to do about that. But when I'm thinking about what we need to do to go back and look at this EFMP again, my sense is what Matt just said, basically, whittle it down to if somebody were to say to you, okay, I'm not going to give you the initial ask, but let's say we'll give you 30 million. Now choose your priorities. You'd have to make choices. And it doesn't mean that you would get to see everything through to fruition. You'd have to sit there and take a scalpel and take some of the plan and discard some of it, unfortunately. And so my sense is that that's probably what's going to happen to move forward is not only make it something digestible, like to use Matt's word, but, you know, I think we have to show the community that we are really prioritizing exactly what we say is a priority, which is space. So we got some feedback that while people may support STEM as a curriculum and as a goal, they might not necessarily support separate dedicated space at the elementary level for it. So maybe that's something that we sit there and consider. Just an idea. I'm not saying we need to discuss that tonight, but I just think we do need to prioritize and possibly whittle it down to something where people can go, okay, well, now that I see that it doesn't have a bunch of add-ons, to use their language, now I'll believe that this is something that could actually solve our problem.
Wes?
I think moving forward, we definitely need to focus on our needs now. I think the message for the past referendum is there was a lot of focus on the future, and people weren't buying into the future. But we have these needs now.
Right. If we never grow, we
Yeah.
still have space issues.
Yeah.
Matt?
Yes.
I know you're there.
You rang.
I mean, out of the EFMP, you said whittle it down to a smaller amount, right? Is that
I thought
is that
that
your
was one of the survey things was everyone thought that it was kind of high in the sky, too big. Like I said, I would have to go back and look at it again. Did a couple weeks ago and kind of chop some stuff off. But
Okay. Yes.
Well, what we know now is the enrollment in K through 5. And so we know that if we do nothing, the issues at the middle school are going to stay for at least 5 years. And unless we see a significant drop, which we'll be seeing year to year in the kindergarten, then we're going to have those issues going forward. So I think we should and can acknowledge that we do have an issue at the middle school level. We also can acknowledge that we're going to see some additional space at the elementary school buildings if we proceed with the kindergarten center, and that's going to provide us some relief there. So if we take the educational and facilities master plan that we have, and as Superintendent Brown indicated, it's a 10-year plan, but we can plan based on what our needs are and project them out as far as we want to, whether it's 5 years or whatever, and then come up with a plan going forward, whether it's a referendum question that is scaled back from what we initially asked for and focuses more on the middle schools or exclusively on the middle schools, or whether it's another plan to address things on a reactive mode if that's what we end up deciding. But we can have the discussion taking the plan that we have and looking at it piece by piece. So that's what I would think we could
Jason?
do.
Yeah, I agree with what Jeff just said. Take the MFP and start making priorities. So if we say middle school is our top priority, all right. What's the cost for all the middle school changes that are needed? All right, what else do we want? What else do we need? And then if everything else falls below our priority list, then we don't do it. If it's up there that we need to do it, then that's where the discussion goes.
Okay.
The MFP gives us a laundry list of options.
It's
List them
9:15.
out and start the priority list.
Can I just add one thing onto what Jeff and Jason said? When we do come back to discuss this, Nick, if you could give us some notion, I do agree, obviously, focus on the middle schools is a good place to start. I know even with the kindergarten center, some of our elementary schools are still going to have a little bit of a problem. If you could come back to us with some kind of information as to how big is that problem still going to be at Elementary South and Town Line specifically, which seem to be our problem areas right now.
Backfill.
Right, because it's backfill,
Right.
and then will Town Line be okay as long as we don't have major growth, or is it going to still be like bursting at the seams? You know, and what are our options there?
Yeah, I've got some, so yeah, I can bring that and make, mind if I jump in here for a second? Maybe then for the next board meeting for this topic, the board members look at the EFMP and focus on what they think they would prioritize, be it a middle school or an elementary. I will bring this information about the elementary schools and what the kindergarten building impact will be and what still may be some needs. Elementary South jumps out as first. That I'll pull 5 kindergarten classrooms out. I'm going to backfill those immediately. So there isn't any space, and we probably have 7 or 8 displaced programs. So you're really not going to how the buildings. So I'll bring that information for you. But then at the meeting when you come, if you say we've looked at the EFMPs, at least start there and say, here's what I would prioritize if I were reducing the dollar amount to meet the needs that you think, and maybe start the conversation there and see what comes up. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah. The next meeting we book, because I'm going to cut this thing off right now. Because we could go on for a long time. So next meeting, we have everything we need. If there's a data piece that you're missing, email Nick and me, and we will make sure that you get that data piece to you. We all have everything, but in case you're missing, the first thing to do is prioritize. From the EFMP that we have, let's prioritize. That's our first goal. And let's see if we come with a consensus of what we have and where we want to go from there, along with the backfill information that we'll get with our kindergarten.
Yes.
Sounds good?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Next.
Hold on.
Huh?
Are we all working on the same data? Do we all have the same EFMP to work with? Or
Yeah.
do you have,
Yeah.
okay, because
If there's any questions, just call me or email me. I'll make sure that.
there are many versions out there.
I was going to say the only clarification, I guess, would be even though we went with option B, that doesn't make option A off the table.
Correct, because
It's
there
just
could be
we're not
pieces of
stuck
A.
to it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I guess we
what
need to
should-
look at
should
everything.
we look at both A and B as our baseline?
Yes.
Okay, from there, what can we pick and choose from and
Yes.
figure out what? Okay.
And all that data was given by Wendy at the first meeting when we swore everybody in.
Okay.
It was in a packet. It's a packet called Growing Together.
Yep. Okay.
Wendy gave it to us. Everybody has that. If you are missing anything, email Nick and me and we'll get it to you. So we all are working of the same format, same things.
And if somebody has a need to come and sit down and go through parts of that, with me or anybody on my staff, we can arrange it and walk through the information. If you weren't part of that process, sometimes you may not have the backstory. Okay.
So the next is the III conference overview. The board and some of the administrators attended the III conference in Chicago last week, the week before. This conference provided knowledge and insight that would directly aid our district, new management ideas, understanding new state and federal education laws and their impact, and creative and new solutions for the school issues. It also provides insight into issues that affect districts that are different than us in terms of size, demographics, and financial standing. So everybody attended some similar, some different sessions. Everybody has a different things that they learned, and this is to share what we learned. So starting with Jason.
You didn't go.
I didn't go.
No.
Oh.
Pass.
Julie.
I'll just briefly touch on I was the delegate for the board, and basically what that was is all the different school districts voting on whether they agreed with the IASB position on issues that were coming forward. And I thought it was very interesting that there were, I believe, 371 different school districts represented, so 371 delegates. So it's a lot of heads, and there was definitely some clashing of them, and different boards had different opinions. Some were in favor of, were very in favor of the recommendations, and some were against. So kind of split like we were, and some were very passionate. It seemed to be a big difference between school areas similar to ours and then school areas like downstate and stuff. You could tell that different things affect different things.
Mm-hmm.
How were our positions? Did we?
They only vote on them if somebody writes in an appeal. And we were in agreement with both questions that were brought before us because nobody had a written appeal for anything else. So we were in agreement with the two that were voted on, and the rest weren't voted on because nobody said they wanted to vote on them.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I went to other things, but we'll just move along.
Yes.
One of the takeaways I had came from the third keynote speaker, and that was as board members and administrators and teachers, sometimes you hear a lot of negative talk about what's not going right and what you're not doing in the district and the things that are wrong with the district. But if you look at it from another perspective of what is going right and the things that you're doing well, it just changes everything. And that's just something that people can step back and change the way they look at things and see what a difference that really makes. So that was a good thing that I saw. And then I went to a topic that I hadn't seen at the conference before on intergovernmental agreements. And
coolest presentation.
For those that don't know, Hawthorn District 73 presented at the conference, and we have a couple of intergovernmental agreements to be proud of, which we're saving a fair amount of money on. The Lincoln School joint venture with a couple other school districts, as well as the kindergarten center project with the Park District and the village and the library. And it was good to be able to present and show other districts ways they can save money, and we're talking for us in the millions of dollars. So I think that was a good thing for our district to do. And I thank Superintendent Brown for leading the discussion in that area. And we also got our Park District Director to come down and participate in that, which was helpful for other school districts to get the other perspective on those types of agreements. So thank you.
Robin.
Okay, so myself, Matt, Abe, Wes, and Jeff all attended the.
There was a board meeting.
Yes, there was.
No, it was not.
We called it to order.
Say no.
But we all attended the referendum after defeat. So I'm actually glad that so many of us listened to this one because I'm sure we all took something different. There was a lot of information coming at us at once. And since this Sheridan could not get their PowerPoint presentation going, it was just kind of all auditory. But lots of good feedback, which I might just forward to you guys. But I think some good takeaways were basically kind of what Julie had already touched on about, asking the community to have input towards the plan that ends up getting put forth. You can't push a yes vote, but you can push people to vote. And just pushing people to vote is usually advantageous. And they did a lot of their work in-house, which I thought if we go back to referendum and we can possibly make use of some of those ideas, that would be great. They took any help offered. So they did not pay any fancy company to do the postcards in the mail. They had a high school student that volunteered that was really good at graphic design that did it for them. And so that kind of thing. And they narrowed the plan down. And I think they admitted that one of the humongous differences was that in between the second ask and the third ask, they had 5 board members turnover. So whether that was the community perceiving that this was a totally different push or whether it was them having a more supportive board of it this time, it sounded like the first couple times they went around, there were some board members that were, one of them, I guess, went so far as to be verbally anti-referendum. So I don't think that helped. But so that was kind of interesting because they ended up going back for a bigger ask than they had put forth the other times. And then the other thing I watched that was worth sharing that Dr. Leali sat in too was strategies for increasing achievement levels of diverse students. And that panel was made up of several districts. And Sonia Whitaker, who's a superintendent, but she does a lot of work, and it sounds like she might even consult with other districts on how to improve achievement among minority students. But it's a really important topic. I mean, at this point in America, most students actually are living in poverty, and most students are minorities. So we may see something a little bit different in our particular community, but I think that's going to be the trend. So they had a lot of interesting ideas, and they do community fairs in the evening where they will invite doctors and dentists and optometrists and really make it like having several services available so that they can pull these people in who normally don't have access to that stuff either because of financial constraints or time constraints. And then while they're there, then they can talk to them about other sort of parent university topics in ways that they can be supportive. And they've even offered bilingual services to not translating, but true bilingual classes to their parents. Everything costs money, but there were a lot of different ideas. So again, I can forward that to you guys because I did think that was interesting.
Were you able to get a PowerPoint from them?
I can email. They gave me their email. They did not hand out like an actual hard copy of the presentation. But, and then talking about the professional development around removing implicit bias and how most teachers in America, I think they said, are like 85% white and female. So that obviously isn't actually representative of the student body, but it's talking about the professional development around the implicit bias and how reluctant most people are to admit that there's any kind of bias in their approach, but how usually by the end of the training, they find different ways that they can approach students that don't necessarily look similar to themselves or come from a similar family or background, despite they might look the same as them. So that was pretty interesting. I mean, I was amazed. One of the high schools had a wraparound center, which they have, DCFS has an office within the building, within the high school. They, once a week, I think they said, they give space to a probation officer thank God at the K-8 level, we don't need that. But, at the high school level, they had a probation officer that comes once a week so that those kids can still meet with their probation officer without skipping school and missing classes, and they can get right back to work. So just kind of like really things like I wouldn't have thought of. So interesting. Oh, and they said you have to give food if you want people to attend. They said forget it if you don't give food.
Wes?
Well, the 4 sessions I attended, the only one that was non-referendum related was the one about the superintendent evaluations. I felt when we did the evaluation last fall, there was a lot I still needed to learn. Unfortunately, I was disappointed by the session because it was pretty much everything that was covered in my para training. I was hoping for more, so I should have gone to another referendum.
ISB will be happy that your para training covered everything.
So I attended the one with everybody about from Champaign, and then Jeff and I were in the one Saturday afternoon. It was District 120, LaSalle, Peru, and that was the long road to a successful building referendum. And Jeff, how many years did they plan out? Was it 4? 3 or 4? Like yeah. And they waited for the right time. And it was interesting hearing their perspective because they used a consultant. They hired a company to handle that. They did the mail, they did the surveys. And their mail survey, they received a response that it was just a little over 50% was in support of the plan, and the board decided to go for it. And the votes pretty much came in, lined up exactly to what the mail and the phone bullet said. So that was pretty interesting. I mean, it barely passed, but it passed.
This is passed.
You only need one vote.
But I guess my biggest takeaway was from the Champaign referendum session and the LaSalle, Peru, was getting the community buy-in, and it truly was the community's plan. And the LaSalle, Peru session talked about how they took some of the biggest opponents and made them super advocates and proponents of the plan. It was interesting how they went about that. That's that.
You know, with the referendum ones, the only one that I didn't mention that I went to was a presentation on adding on to existing buildings, like older structure, which was somewhat interesting. Nothing that was mind-shattering there. The only other thing I learned, I walked the floor with Abe for a while, we learned that there's a lot of AstroTurf. A lot of AstroTurf available.
And bleachers.
Bleachers.
Tons of bleachers.
So, yeah, my big takeaway was pretty much hitting up on the referendum stuff. I did also go to a social media one on how to use Facebook, but there was, again, that one wasn't like mind-boggling. Ordinary, but it was still interesting. It was a good weekend. Very educational.
Nick?
Yes. I went to a session. It was an all-day session, and it was monitoring district performance, titled Saying What We Mean and Doing What We Say. And the biggest takeaway on that one I thought was interesting is we've been trying to monitor and align reports towards the strategic plan. And they were suggesting some annual reports and information to the board aligned to the policies. And the strategic plan's supported by the policies and vice versa, but it was interesting difference in how they presented to put that data information together. So I'm re-reviewing that material that they gave us and see what components of that would be helpful and may help clarify. And then that also may help us with our, we have a board calendar when things are on. And so it may help clarify when certain things come to the board because there's certain annual or certain dates within the policy. So I thought that one was very interesting and was helpful. And they talked about the type of language and the purpose of on particular policies. So I'm re-reviewing that. You sit and you're there all day. Dr. Leali and I were there all day for that. And you walk out and it's like a little overload, and you come back and start rereading the stuff. So, but I thought that was very interesting, and it gave me a different perspective of maybe how I can provide information to the board that might be clearer for the board and the community.
Sonali, I thought about something else I wanted to add really quick.
Sure.
One more thing I went to. So one of the ones that I went to was decisions. It was whether it's a superintendent decision, a board decision, both, and all that stuff. And I found it very interesting that, there were people from districts throughout the states that people really did things very differently. Some boards were even involved in like interviewing and hiring of principals more than just, approval. I mean, we have such a big district. I mean, that's not really logical, but there really is no standard or box. Like, you can go outside the box. So.
Want to add something?
I too felt it was overall very well. It's value added overall. I did attend a financial seminar presented by District 99, where they went from being cash-based to modified accrual, and it paints a very different financial picture when you do that. I thought that was, I learned a lot from that presentation. Thank you.
Wendy? I attended a few sessions. Now most of us attended the main keynote speaker, which was Ruby Payne. She talked about working with students from poverty and how it is a generational issue, and how do we need to start different ways of starting to address it and teaching. She was a great speaker, fun speaker to talk to. And some of the other ones that I did was I did attend one of the referendum one, which was Skokie 73, which was interesting that this was not more about the referendum. They had hired a consultant and stuff, but it was also, they added on to their building and how their buildings were, like they had cracks in their foundations and things like that, and how they convinced some of the people to, essentially to say, your buildings are this much in disarray and you need some fixing, kind of. One of the interesting things that I liked about their referendum, or when they were trying to educate the community, was instead of doing it, they actually had a calendar on board on their website, and they broke down their meetings in different, they had a lot of common meetings of just come and meet us kind of things, but when they were doing the informational meetings, they actually broke them down into 4 or 5 categories. So one was just finances, one was just, infrastructure, one was just, just showing. So the meetings didn't go long. A lot of your message didn't get lost with, if you started with space and then you didn't land up with programming and get mixed up in this, in what was common or what was important. Plus it kept it short. So people who wanted to just stay for the 25 minutes stayed for that. The rest who wanted to mingle with the board and the administration could do that. I thought that was a really good idea of breaking down the components into the building. And the calendar was available so people knew everything was online. Once the meeting was done, it was on YouTube and stuff, so people could go and watch it. I thought that was a really good idea of doing that. I was with the IGA presentation, and Nick killed it without this PowerPoint slides working.
I was trying to hear if somebody else had the same problem. So
Yeah, I think it was like a Sheridan thing.
But I think we all miss Dimitri because we had nobody who could figure out how to get this thing to work. But one of the ones I went to was salary negotiations, just different ways communities work or boards work, because everybody has limited amount of resources, wants to hire and keep your teachers, keep everybody happy. your good teachers is good student output and things like that. I went to a couple interesting ones, and one of the ones I went to was a property tax freeze, and this was on a Friday afternoon. And it was an amazing session. It was standing room only, packed to the core. You were really comfortable with your neighbor. It was that close. But it was a lot of bigwigs, and I forget their names. But and I have to give hats off to them. One was Senator Dan McConchy, and another one was a Congressman Mike Zwoleski. I'm sorry if I butchered his name, but the two of them were there, and they were taking questions from the crowd. And essentially, even the panel was IASB people who, of course, this was regarding the property tax freeze that they passed the Senate and is sitting in the House, will go in springtime, as to how it affects it. So people attack them. Hats off to those two guys for taking it on the chin, because it was a very contentious conversation, because most of the thing was, you're going to freeze the property taxes. Illinois is last in the U.S. in funding public school education. And if you take away the resources and you add all these mandates and stuff and not give us the money, how is the money going to come from? So then you are going to land up having to cut programming and not meet the students' needs. So that was a good conversation. There was quite a bit of back and forth. One of the things that I did like in that one which was a couple of things, was I myself, even though I had read it, was not aware of there are a lot of easements built into this property tax freeze. And depending on whether you qualify for these easements or not, even if when the community votes that for a yes on a property tax freeze, if you don't qualify for some of these easements, your property tax bill might actually go up. So there are actually some calculators, and I think we should actually educate our community one time. There's a calculator that you can put online, and there's a gentleman whose name I forwarded to Nick, who has a property. So if you put in your house value based on all the assessment, it'll exactly tell you how much you would save versus how much is your school losing in the whole thing. So when people actually go to vote in, they would actually know that for, over a period of 5 years or 10 years, if you're going to, you might save only $300, $400, but your school is losing $12.5 million. We did the last time some math. So it would be a good way to educate our community as how it impacts all of us. And it's something that we can easily put on our calculators. I think we definitely do need to do it as a future discussion, to do an in-depth thing of what is involved, but not now, but before it goes up, and so people can start calling their congressmen and senators to see which way they would swing. The other one was, one of the things I went to was a board president's roundtable. It was interesting. It was an interesting conversation with other board presidents. And one of the things that I did kind of learn from that was about the same way we have an IASB is the National Association of School Board. And everybody said that it was a very important meeting to go to. We should send our representatives. It's in the future discussion I want to talk to you guys about, if we should send representatives to that. This time it's in San Antonio, and we have a deadline for before January to set it in. If we want to send people, we have money for PD to send 2 members in. If they want to,
When is it?
April 4th or April 7th, something like that.
I'll send you the information.
I'm busy that day. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, let me send it to you because you can see where it's at. We do have some money that was built in for this, for PD, for the board. There is a early bird registration by January 2nd or 3rd or something. I forget what it is. But the sooner we know, the better, because they have block housing, so you get a better hotel. Those things fill up pretty quickly, and it's nice to be at the right hotels if at all possible.
It seemed interesting. Well, if I looked at the program and stuff, very interesting. And most of the board presidents out there said that it's something really useful of what you do, what you learn from other districts and come back. I didn't know if this is something, even if we decide not to go, maybe we can open it up again for next year. But I wanted to have a conversation as a board. Is it something as a board we are interested in sending somebody? And then if somebody is interested in going, they can put their name in the hat and we'll just randomly choose 2 people or decide on 2 people who get to go.
Do we get to find out ahead of time what the various topics of discussion will be?
Some of them are online already, but again, the same way with IASB, not everything is not in details, but some of them are. If you go to NASB site itself, some of the topics are on there already right now.
Send the links, and I mean, even if we decide not to send anyone or nobody can go, a lot of times they'll have presentations available.
It's on NASB. Like the same IASB site is
the
an
same
NASB.
one?
No, it's an NASB site.
NESB.
NA, National Association.
So.
Because a lot of the times they post their things online later.
Yeah, later after the meeting is done.
So if looks good, we can look into it and explore it, kind of.
But those were the 2 questions I had. So if you want to send somebody, maybe we can think about it. No, yes, no. We can finish the meeting and come back to it on future topics. So that was about it for a couple of things. Next, consent agenda. Includes board minutes from November 13th, the Amex report from October, expenditure report of November, retirement of Mr. Tykert, leave of absence of Ms. Boardman and Mindy Korn. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda items as presented.
I second.
Motion by Robbins, seconded by Wes. Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Jason Tron.
Aye.
Julie Simpson.
Aye.
Jeff Bard.
Aye.
Robin Cleek.
Aye.
Wes Pullen, aye. Matt Jacobs.
Aye.
Sonali Patel.
Aye. Motion passes 7 ayes, 0 nays. President reports. I think I've talked enough. No, but I have something else to talk. I had just a second. Sorry, I forgot. One of the topics for future discussion is, other than the NASB, if you want to do a PD, and if there is a consensus, we can talk now, or you guys can let me know, let me and Nick know. One of the things is we have a lot going on as far as with our IGAs, a lot of things happening with our space constraints, everything. It was a suggestion by Jeff, which I completely agree to, is I made a list of things that we need as representatives, 7 of us need to be the representative or kind of a liaison to look at the agenda. And if there's something important in that, governmental bodies or, like the Village of Vernon Hills or Village of Mundelein or Village of Libertyville, if there's something important that you think pertains to us and we should attend, then you can send a note and one of us needs to attend it. But if there's nothing important, then it is still you as a liaison is responsible for going through the minutes at least. Then they get published to know if something was discussed which wasn't on the agenda or in that topic which pertains to us, so that we can keep track of things that keep coming down the pipeline and we are not missing something that we should have taken care of. Some of the things, Matt is already a liaison for CEDAW. Some of the ones that I looked up and if I've missed something, let me know. And then you can, it's Village of Vernon Hills, Village of Mundelein, Village of Libertyville, the Cook Library, the Vernon Hills Park District, District 128, which is a high school, District 70, Libertyville, because we do share transportation and stuff with them. District 75, which is Mundelein, District 79, Fremont, District 76, Diamond Lake, District 103, Lincolnshire, because we're talking about the Woodland Chase with them. And after Mr. Collins talked, the Mundelein High School. So those are the ones. So it's about 13 of them. We got to take
2 apiece.
2 apiece, and one of, because so this way we know you have to monitor them for their agendas and their minutes. If there's something that we need to attend, if you can't attend it, which I completely understand, let the other people on the board know so somebody can represent us. Any takers?
I already go through the minutes for Vernon Hills because I'm a loser. No social life, so I can do that.
So you're doing Vernon Hills and CEDAW. You're already
maxed out. Yay!
Thanks, Matt.
I'll take the Park District in D103.
You'll take Park District.
And what was the other one?
D103.
Okay, hold on. Julie. And D103 is Lincolnshire.
I'll
Anybody?
take what
128.
Huh?
I'll take 128.
Okay, 128.
what else?
I don't know. I
You need to
have
take
to
two.
think about the other
Take
ones.
two, they're
You can-
small.
All of them, but that was most of what you said.
That's fine. He can come back to it. You?
I'll take whatever two you want to give me.
Doesn't. No, you get to choose.
Oh, I get to
Yes.
choose. Fancy.
Yeah.
I'll take District 70, which
Okay.
is that what you wanted? Rock, paper. Right.
Add some more.
Fine, I'll take District 70 and I'll take one of the Mundelein districts, whichever one you want to give me.
It's Mundelein, Fremont, Diamond Lake. Pick one.
Diamond Lake.
Okay.
How do I choose?
Bess, Jeff.
Jeff, do you have a preference?
No, go ahead.
So we still have Mundelein and Libertyville.
We have Village of Mundelein, Village of Libertyville. Cook.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take Fremont
Cook
Okay.
libraries are
and
Book libraries.
do I want the library or do I want a municipality? I'll take the library.
Okay, Cook Library. S.
It's Diamond Lake 76. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
The things remaining are Village of Mundelein, Village of Libertyville, and Mundelein High School. And District 75, which is Mundelein, too, remaining. Jeff?
Yeah.
I'll do Village of Libertyville. I lost.
Mundelein High School, and District 75. 3 of them remaining.
Which one is 75?
75, Mundelein Elementary.
Oh, I'll do the high school.
You'll do the high school? Jason, you want anyone more? Or
What's
you
left?
Village of Mundelein and District 75. Mundelein is left.
Like 75.
You'll take 75? Okay, that leaves me with Village of Mundelein. Thank you, everybody.
You'll send out a note to all of us saying which one we're assigned to, so we can figure out.
Yes, I will.
So as far as I know, you suggested
You'll keep
that if we
that
see
note, I
something on
will.
the agenda that's of relevance, that somebody should attend. What about the entities that meet on the same nights we do? I have to assume there's some of them.
There's some of them, and if they are,
Yeah,
then
128. What do you think I took?
We can
that?
figure.
Mundelein too.
Just get I guess we
Just
get
the minutes and
notes,
watch the video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll just.
You're
We'll
not going
just
to make
get,
me watch the video, are you?
like I said, if
Are their meetings also 3.5 hours long?
and I cut you off. Okay, I think that's enough for my talking. Superintendent's report.
Real quick, welcome back from Thanksgiving for everybody. We appreciate the break. Everybody hopefully had some time with their family. We do have Middle School North Band Concert, all grades, in the Middle School North Gym at 7 p.m. on December 5th. Trimester 1 report cards distributed December 6th. Middle School Winter Band Jazz Band Concert at Middle School South Gym, 7 p.m. on December 6th. PTO Bake Sale at Middle School South on December 8th. And Middle School North and Middle School South are gearing up for Geography B. What we got going?
That's it. I had one thing. The NASB conference is April 7th through 9th in San Antonio.
And I'll send out a link.
Okay, can we get a consensus if everybody thinks it's a good idea or a bad idea as a PD for board members?
I think depending on what topics are being presented, it could be a good idea. I think otherwise it might be a waste of resources, but
There is I've only been once in 13 years as a superintendent, but I have had board members in previous District 1. And there is a benefit. Going every year is not a
No.
benefit. Every other year or every 2 years, because it brings you into a national conversation. And that's what kept bringing back is that there was a national conversation that beyond the Indiana as a state. So they saw a real benefit in that. Besides what was being presented, having the conversations across state lines of some similar issues. And at that time, we were very concerned about charters, and there's this movement going across multiple states. So I would suggest that I think, even if you didn't see something, this particular one that jumped out, it might be worthwhile for one or two to go to see how you felt about that being part of the national conversation, because that was the biggest feedback I got from previous board members.
Okay.
Okay, we can look at the agenda, whatever is posted up there, and if you guys could just email me and Nick. Regarding emailing.
I think it needs to be a board decision, though, whether to send somebody.
No, but, okay.
Right.
Yes.
So do you want to make a decision now?
It's not.
Why don't we think about it?
Can we decide at the December meeting?
Put it on the agenda so we can talk about it.
Huh?
Put it on the agenda so we can talk about it.
Okay, we can put it on the agenda for the next meetings to talk about it.
Can I add an announcement to what Nick had announced?
Sure.
For anybody who's interested, because I think it's relevant to a lot of us, on December 6th at 6:30 p.m., the high school at Vernon Hills is going to be screening a documentary called Screenager about screen time and its effect on our young minds. So I wish I could go that evening. I actually can't, but
It's on December 12th, right?
6th.
6th. Right.
I cannot go, but I will watch the documentary and some other presentation. But the high school is screening it for $1 a ticket via Sport.
Oh, I think that's any topics for future discussion?
Not other than what I've brought up the last several times.
Yeah, the tech policy. I keep bringing it up.
Coming to you.
Coming to you. Anything else? No. I had one request to the rest of the board members before I adjourn. When you email questions, you need to make sure that you CC me on those so that we can make sure that you get your answers. Also, you can keep track. It's also a check and balances that things don't fall through. So make sure that when you email, that you're emailing me too, along with Nick.
Yes.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Motion by Robin. Do I have a second?
I second.
Motion by Robin, second by Bess. Can I? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7 ayes, 0 nays.
What?